Hi friends. Tonight we're sailing under the black flag. You've heard stories of pirates, gold, maps, treasure beneath X's. But have you ever lived a day on a pirate ship? Felt the salt crust on your skin? Heard the crack of the whip before sunrise? Slept beside cannonballs and rats? This isn't a story of buried treasure. It's about the life that bought the legend. The hunger, the storms, the diseases, and the fear of mutiny. So breathe in the sea air, damp, bitter, unforgiving. And if stories like this brighten up your day, a like and subscribe goes a long way. And hey, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where these little voyages reach. Now, close your eyes. The tide's pulling us back in time, and I hope you're ready. Because you wouldn't last a day on this ship. The gallows creaked under the weight of the swinging pirate. His boots jerked once, twice, then stilled as life abandoned him. The crowd's laughter rippled across the square, mingling with the cries of gulls and distant sea shanties. Jacob Yancey stood at the edge of the gathering, thin shoulders hunched beneath a shirt 3 sizes too large, eyes fixed on the dead man's face. He clutched his cloth sack tighter. Inside, a moldy biscuit, a broken knife, and a scrap of paper with his mother's name, all he had left of England. The Caribbean sun beat down mercilessly, making his head swim. "Move along, filth!" a woman in a silk dress hissed, striking him with her fan as she passed. Jacob stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing on the cobblestone slick with spilled rum and worse. Port Royal roared around him, a symphony of sin. Merchants shouted prices for sugar and slaves in the same breath. A fight spilled out of a nearby tavern, 2 men locked in a bloody embrace. A woman with jewels in her teeth beckoned to sailors from a balcony. His stomach growled. 3 days since his last proper meal. "Excuse me, sir." He approached a fruit vendor whose cart overflowed with mangoes and strange speckled fruits he'd never seen. "Any work?" "I can carry." The vendor's hand shot out, shoving Jacob hard enough to send him sprawling into the gutter. "Vermin, touch my goods and I'll have your fingers." Jacob scrambled to his feet, but not before a hand darted out from the crowd, snatching his sack. "No!" He lunged, grabbing the bag's corner. The thief, a boy not much older than himself, snarled and yanked harder. "Let go or I'll gut you." Jacob drove his knee upward, connecting with something soft. The thief wheezed and released the bag. Jacob ran, feet pounding against the uneven street, ducking into the first open doorway he found. Laughter erupted around him. He froze, blinking in the dim light. Red velvet draped the walls. Women in various states of undress lounged on cushions. A man with no shirt counted coins at a table. A woman with painted lips hoisted her tankard. He's early for his first sin. More laughter. Jacob's face burned. He backed toward the door, bumping into a table, sending glasses crashing to the floor. "You'll pay for that with your hide, boy," the shirtless man growled, rising. Jacob bolted, bursting through the door and into the blinding sunlight. He ran blindly, turning corners, splashing through puddles that reeked of piss and brine until he slammed full force into what felt like a brick wall. Hands like iron vises gripped his shoulders. Jacob looked up into a weathered face split by a jagged grin. The man's fingers were permanently curled, skin glossy with burn scars. He smelled of gunpowder and salt. "You got all your teeth, boy." The quartermaster's eyes narrowed, examining Jacob's face like he was appraising livestock. "Good. The cannons don't care if you're scared." "Sir, The quartermaster's grip tightened, cutting off Jacob's words. With one swift motion, he grabbed Jacob by the collar and began marching him toward the harbor. "Captain needs powder monkeys. Last one got himself blown to bits." He chuckled, the sound like rocks grinding together. Careless with the spark he was. Jacob's feet scrambled to keep pace. Through gaps between warehouses, he caught glimpses of the harbor and the ship. The Revenge loomed dark against the water, her patched hull rising and falling with the gentle swells. Black sails hung limp in the heat. At her bow, a monstrous flag rippled, skeleton hand clutching a bleeding heart. "Please, I'm not—" "You're whatever I say you are." The quartermaster dragged him forward. "And I say you've been sold." The quartermaster shoved Jacob forward, toward a stooped merchant with skin like boiled leather. The two men stood at the edge of the dock, haggling in low voices while salt-laden wind tugged at their clothes. "Too scrawny," the merchant captain muttered, pinching Jacob's arm. "Barely enough meat to feed the sharks." "Survived yellow fever," the quartermaster countered. "Quick on his feet. Don't need much feeding." Jacob shifted uncomfortably, not fully comprehending that he was the merchandise being appraised. His attention drifted past them to the harbor, where a familiar hull caught his eye. The English merchant vessel, the same ship that had carried him from London, was hoisting anchor. Sailors scurried across its deck, preparing to depart. 4 crowns, the merchant offered. 6, the quartermaster growled. 4 and this. The merchant produced a flask from his coat. Money changed hands. The quartermaster pocketed the coins and flask with a grunt of satisfaction. Jacob's heart lurched as he watched the merchant ship's sails unfurl. Without thinking, he bolted toward the edge of the dock, arms waving frantically. "Wait! That's my ship. I'm supposed to—" A vice-like grip clamped around his collar, yanking him backward. He choked as the quartermaster dragged him away from the water's edge. "Not your ship anymore," the quartermaster snarled, his breath hot against Jacob's ear. "Now shut your gob, or I'll shut it for you." Jacob looked around desperately. The docks bustled with activity. Slaves loading cargo, sailors mending nets, merchants arguing prices. But no one spared him a glance. Every face turned away, intent on their own survival. "You're worth 4 crowns and a rat's tail," the quartermaster grumbled as they walked. "That's more than most men I've served with." He jerked Jacob along like a dog on a leash. "You'll work the magazine. Powder monkeys don't need brains, just speed and silence." They passed a row of wooden latrines hanging over the water, the stench making Jacob gag. A wild-eyed priest stood on a barrel, condemning the drunken sailors to eternal hellfire. Nearby, a monkey in a little vest danced for coins, its owner grinning with blackened teeth. Jacob twisted free and bolted down an alley. He scrambled up a stack of crates, fingers clawing at a wall. He'd made it halfway when a weight slammed into him from behind. He crashed through a fish crate, landing hard among broken wood and rotting scales. The quartermaster's face loomed over him. "Strike 2, strike 3, your ballast." At a dockside post, a fat man with ledger and quill looked Jacob up and down, then chuckled. He lifted a branding iron from a brazier, the end glowing orange-red. "Want the P for pirate, or the R for runaway?" The quartermaster waved it away with a laugh. "Too scrawny. Would burn clean through him." Jacob glanced up at the Revenge. Hard faces peered down from the railings. Scarred, sun-darkened men with missing teeth and hungry eyes. "Fresh meat," someone called. Another whistled mockingly. At the gangplank, the quartermaster lifted Jacob by his collar and hurled him onto the deck. He landed hard, splinters driving into his palms. Something warm and wet hit the deck beside his head. Someone spit. Jacob raised his eyes. Rusted cannons lined the deck. Men sharpened cutlasses on whetstones. Rats scurried between coils of rope. A one-eyed sailor fashioned a noose, grinning as he tested its give. The quartermaster's voice boomed across the deck. "Welcome aboard the Revenge. You're gonna wish you drowned first." Morning came like a slap. Jacob's eyes cracked open, sunlight stabbing through swollen lids. His body felt hammered flat against the deck, splinters embedded in his palms. Around him, the ship buzzed with activity. Men hauling ropes, shouting commands, cursing the wind. Nobody spared him a glance. He sat up, head swimming. The Revenge had left port sometime during the night. Port Royal was now just a smudge on the horizon. Jacob's stomach lurched with the ship's roll. A bearded pirate with arms like tree trunks worked nearby, lashing barrels to the deck. Jacob stumbled toward him on wobbly legs. "Excuse me, where am I supposed to—" The man's fist shot out without even looking, connecting with Jacob's gut. Air exploded from his lungs as he collapsed to his knees, gasping. "First lesson," the man muttered, continuing his work. "No talking. Just haul." Before Jacob could recover, a wiry pirate with a missing ear yanked him upright by his collar. His face was a map of scars, and his breath reeked of garlic. "Bilge duty, rat." He thrust a leaking wooden bucket into Jacob's hands. "Start in the stern. If you stop bailing, we start sinking." He shoved Jacob toward a hatch leading to the lower deck. The descent into darkness felt endless. Each step down the creaking ladder took Jacob deeper into a nightmare. The stench hit him first, a wall of rot, human waste, and something sickeningly sweet. Water sloshed past his ankles, black with filth. Jacob plunged the bucket into the rising bilge water, arms straining as he hauled it up. He emptied it into a drainage channel, then repeated the motion. Again. Again. His shoulders burned. Something scurried across his foot. Rats. They swarmed in the shadows, red eyes gleaming. From a dark corner came a low moan. Human. Jacob squinted and saw the outline of someone chained to a support beam, mumbling deliriously. The heat and stench overwhelmed him. His stomach heaved. Jacob crawled toward the stairs, dropped the bucket, and vomited near the bottom step. "Please," he croaked, "I'm not supposed to be here." A shadow fell across him. The bearded pirate from above stood at the top of the stairs, a length of wet rope wrapped around his fist. He descended slowly. Second lesson: nobody cares where you are supposed to be. The rope whistled through the air, striking Jacob's back with a wet crack. Fire bloomed across his skin. Later, a passing officer with brass buttons pointed to a tangle of rigging high above. "Lines caught, monkey. Climb and fix it or fall and die. Either's faster than you whining." Rough hands pushed Jacob toward the rat lines. He climbed barefoot, the ropes cutting into his soft soles. Wind buffeted him from all sides. His fingers, slick with sweat, slipped on the rigging. A crow perched on the nearest yard arm, watching with apparent amusement as Jacob fumbled with the tangled rope. By sunset, Jacob collapsed behind a coiled hawser near the cannon. Every muscle screamed. A pirate with a tattooed face walked past, dropping half a hard biscuit beside him without a word. Jacob ate in silence, eyes wide, body still trembling. 2 lessons learned. Shut up and haul. Morning fog clung to the deck like a death shroud. Jacob leaned against a barrel, nursing his bruised ribs, watching crewmen move through the haze like ghosts. Their voices were hushed, faces tense. Something had changed overnight. "Captain's coming today," a grizzled sailor muttered as he passed. Black Bill himself. Jacob's stomach knotted. He'd heard whispers about Captain Cormac. None reassuring. Midship, voices suddenly rose in anger. 2 pirates squared off, one clutching a half-empty bottle of rum, the other jabbing a finger at his chest. "You cheated me. 3 coins short." "Learn to count, you dog-faced bastard." The first punch landed with a wet smack. Then came the knife, a flash of steel in the fog. Men abandoned their tasks, forming a circle around the brawl. They howled and jeered, tossing coins to the deck as bets. 10 on Reeves. He'll gut him like a mackerel." Jacob pressed against the mainmast, trying to stay invisible. A burly sailor with rotting teeth spotted him and grinned. "Look, boys, the powder monkey needs education." Rough hands seized Jacob's shoulders. He was shoved forward, stumbling into the fight circle just as one of the men fell backward. A boot whistled past Jacob's ear. He dropped to his knees, arms covering his head. Then, silence. It descended like a physical weight. The laughter died. The shouting ceased. Even the waves seemed to quiet. Heavy footsteps crossed the quarterdeck. Jacob looked up. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the rising sun. His long coat hung motionless in the still air, its edges stained dark. As he descended to the main deck, Jacob saw him clearly. Weathered face, black hair pulled tight, one eye milky white. His left hand rested casually on a rusted cutlass handle. Captain William Black Bill. Cormac. Without warning, he drew a pistol and fired into the sky. The crack echoed across the water. The fighting men froze mid-struggle. Cormac's arm swung down. The second shot came without hesitation. A red mist erupted from the nearest brawler's skull. The man collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, blood pooling beneath him. "We are not a family," Cormac said, his voice unnervingly calm. "We are not a democracy. We are a blade, and I am the hand that swings it. If you disobey, you die. If you question me, you drown." His good eye swept the deck, stopping on Jacob. "This one's new. What's your name, boy?" Jacob's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The silence stretched. "You'll answer faster next time, if you want a tongue to answer with." Cormac turned to the quartermaster. "I'll train this one myself. He's got rat eyes." Nervous laughter rippled through the crew. The quartermaster bowed slightly, his face carefully blank. The dead pirate's body was rolled overboard without ceremony. Cormac walked the length of the ship alone, hands clasped behind his back. Men scrambled from his path like roaches from light. Jacob remained frozen, watching. There was no justice here, only survival under a madman crowned in salt and blood. The sun beat down mercilessly as the crew assembled near the mainmast. Men wiped tar from calloused hands, tucked pistols into sashes, and shuffled into a wide semicircle. Jacob found himself pushed forward through the crowd of unwashed bodies until he stood awkwardly at the front, the quartermaster's shadow falling across him. A slow, rhythmic thumping began, a wooden stick striking against an empty barrel. The hollow sound echoed across the deck, matching the nervous pounding in Jacob's chest. From the shadows of the forecastle emerged a tall figure, skin like tanned leather stretched over bones. The boatswain's hollow eyes seemed fixed on nothing and everything at once. In one hand, he carried a rolled oilskin scroll, yellowed at the edges. In the other, a flintlock pistol tucked visibly at his hip. Captain Cormac raised a single finger. The drumming ceased instantly, leaving only the creak of wood and splash of waves against the hull. "These are the articles of our ship," Cormac said, his voice barely above a whisper yet carrying across the deck. "Read them. Know them. If you break them, you won't have time to regret it." The boatswain unrolled the scroll with practiced movements. His voice rasped like sandpaper on wood. Article 1. Every man has equal vote in affairs of moment, equal share of provisions and plunder, unless otherwise decreed by the captain. Jacob furrowed his brow. Equal shares. That sounded almost fair. A flicker of hope sparked in his chest. The boatswain continued without pause. No fighting aboard ship. No theft from shipmates. All disputes settled ashore or by duel. Unless the captain wants you dead, a sailor muttered behind Jacob. Another laughed nervously, the sound dying quickly when Cormac's gaze swept toward them. Any man caught deserting, marooned. Any man caught stealing, whipped or dismembered. Any man defying the captain, execution. With each punishment listed, Jacob noticed crewmen exchanging glances, eyes darting to empty spaces where men had stood just days before. A strange shape caught Jacob's eye. To the side of the mast hung a blackened plank, nailed with human fingers, ears, and a jawbone pinned through with a rusted nail. "We don't write warnings," a sailor whispered close to Jacob's ear. "We nail 'em." The quartermaster produced a small, battered ledger from inside his coat. With a stub of charcoal, he scrawled Jacob's name onto a page crowded with crossed-out entries. "You signed when you stepped aboard," he told Jacob. "There's no ink, only blood and rope." At the reading's conclusion, tankards appeared as if by magic. The crew raised them skyward. "Death to kings, gold to the bold." Some bellowed with genuine fervor. Others merely lifted their cups, eyes darting sideways, noting who cheered loudest and who remained silent. Cormac stepped forward again, his good eye scanning the assembled men. "This ship don't need saints. It needs survivors. And if you can't follow rules, you'll feed the sharks before we ever see battle." He turned and walked away. The scroll rolled shut with a snap. Cheers faded to murmurs. Jacob stood frozen, understanding washing over him like cold seawater. These weren't rules to live by. They were warnings of how you'd die. Morning light filtered through the hatch, catching motes of dust in grey shafts. The Revenge rocked gently, its sails full with a steady breeze that had carried them days from any shore. Jacob woke to empty hammocks swinging around him, the creaking of timber and distant voices above. His stomach growled. Following the scent of smoke and salt, he descended to the galley where men already hunched over their meals. The low-ceilinged space trapped heat and stench, unwashed bodies, rotting wood, and something faintly sweet-sour that made Jacob's empty stomach clench. The cook, a mountain of a man with a single milky eye and skin pocked like toad leather, stood behind a steaming cauldron. Men shuffled past with outstretched bowls, receiving dollops of grey stew that seemed to move of its own accord. Jacob waited until the line thinned before approaching with his tin bowl. The cook, Toad, they called him, looked him up and down with his good eye. "New powder, boy," Toad grunted, slopping a meager portion into Jacob's bowl. He tossed a hard crust of bread on top. "Don't ask what's in it. Just eat fast before it crawls out." Jacob found a barrel to perch on, watching the crew. Some ate shirtless, night sweat still glistening on tattooed skin. Others hunched protectively over their portions, shoveling food with dirty fingers. Two men reached simultaneously for a forgotten biscuit on the table. Their hands collided. One, a red-haired sailor with a scar splitting his lip, glared at the other, a gaunt man with yellowed teeth. "That's mine, Harrow," the red-haired man growled. "I don't see your name on it, Deke." The room fell silent. Jacob felt the tension thicken like fog. Before anyone could speak, Harrow's hand flashed downward. A blade appeared from his boot and plunged into Deke's neck with practiced precision. Blood fountained across the table, spraying Jacob's bowl and face with warm droplets. Deke made a wet, gurgling sound. His eyes widened in surprise, then emptied as he slumped forward onto the table. No one moved. No one gasped. A sailor simply shifted away from the spreading pool of blood and continued chewing. Another reached across Deke's twitching body and claimed the disputed biscuit. Jacob's spoon hung frozen mid-air. His throat constricted. The warm spatter on his face felt like it was burning into his skin. His stomach heaved. "Eat up, monkey," the sailor beside him said, delivering a sharp slap to his back. "You don't waste salt, and you don't waste stew." Two men grabbed Deke by the ankles and dragged him across the floor. His head thumped rhythmically against the wooden boards, leaving a crimson streak behind. They hummed a sea shanty as they worked. As they hauled the body up to the main deck, Captain Cormac passed them on the stairs. He glanced at the corpse with casual indifference. "He lose a fight over breakfast?" "Aye," one of the men replied. "Then he don't deserve supper." Cormac continued on his way without breaking stride. Jacob stared at his blood-speckled stew. The fish floating in it seemed to stare back. He forced himself to lift the spoon to his mouth, swallowing mechanically. Each bite tasted like metal and fear, but he ate. Because now he understood. Even breakfast was a battle here, and the dead didn't get second helpings. Jacob clutched his broom with white knuckles, sweeping spilled powder into neat piles below the gun deck. His hands still trembled from breakfast. Every time he blinked, he saw Deke's blood spraying across the table. He kept his head down, but his eyes tracked the movements above, watching, learning, cataloging who spoke to whom, who yielded to whom. A strange hush fell over the deck. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men shifted aside without looking up. The rhythm of work continued, but muted, as if the ship itself held its breath. Bootsteps approached, unhurried, deliberate. Jacob peered through the rigging. A woman walked the quarterdeck, her movements fluid as water over stone. She wore loose canvas breeches cinched with a faded blue sash, a Spanish dagger hanging from her hip. A red scarf contained her dark hair, though rebellious strands escaped to dance in the salt breeze. Her face bore the mark of sun and wind, eyes dark as gunpowder and just as dangerous. No one guarded her. No one ordered her. She moved as if the ship belonged to her. A burly pirate, the same one who'd beaten Jacob yesterday, stepped into her path. She didn't alter her course, didn't speed up or slow down. She walked through his space as if he were smoke, her shoulder brushing his chest as she passed. The man didn't challenge her, didn't speak, just stepped back after she'd gone by, like a rock yielding to the tide. Jacob stared, forgetting himself. Her eyes snapped to his, caught him watching. He dropped his gaze instantly, but too late. Her boots changed direction, heading toward him. "What's your name, Rat?" Her voice carried hints of distant shores, musical yet sharp. Jacob," he stammered, not daring to look up. She crouched beside him, studying his face. This close, he could see a thin scar tracing her jawline like a silver thread. Too soft to last, too smart to die early. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "We'll see how you rot." With a flash of steel, she flicked her blade at his boot. Jacob flinched, but she'd only impaled a rat that had been sniffing near his foot. She rose in one fluid motion, leaving the creature twitching. As she walked away, two sailors nearby exchanged whispers. She slit a Dutch captain's throat in Tortuga with a pin, tied his hands in his sleep. Never saw her coming. Jacob watched the quartermaster on the upper deck. The man who'd bought him, who'd whipped him for wasting food, stood with arms crossed, watching Isabella's interaction with him. He said nothing, made no move to interfere. His silence spoke volumes. Later, Jacob heard her voice again, first in French, translating demands to a captured merchant sailor, then mocking an English crewman in perfect London dialect. When she cursed, it flowed from Spanish to Creole to Dutch without pause. Even Captain Cormac paused to listen when she spoke. Jacob understood then. Not the biggest, not the loudest, but the most dangerous person aboard the Revenge walked in a woman's form. She knew things. She saw things. She survived. And Jacob wondered, was she his destruction or his salvation? The shout rang across the deck like cannon fire. "Blood for blood! Blood for blood!" Jacob dropped his broom and scrambled up the ladder. Afternoon sun slashed across the main deck where crew members formed a wide circle, their faces twisted with savage delight. Some pounded barrels with calloused palms, others stomped boots against wood. The rhythmic chanting built like an approaching storm. "Blood for blood! Blood for blood!" Two older boys, 15, maybe 16, were dragged into the circle's center. One struggled, earning a backhand that split his lip. The other stood rigid, eyes darting like trapped animals. A hand clamped Jacob's collar. He kicked backward, connecting with nothing but air as he was lifted and hurled forward. He landed hard beside the other boys, the impact rattling his teeth. "Fresh meat!" A bearded pirate with missing front teeth spat brown juice onto the deck. "Let's see who's worth their biscuit." The quartermaster stepped into the ring, his shadow stretching across all three boys. The crowd quieted, but the tension hummed like a plucked wire. No weapons. No help. His burnt fingers twisted black cloths. Blindfolds on. Last one standing gets dinner tonight. The rest get nothing but bruises. Rough hands tied cloth around Jacob's eyes. Darkness swallowed him. His hands trembled as he was spun in a circle, disorienting him completely. A bell clanged. Chaos erupted. A shoulder slammed into Jacob's chest. He stumbled backward. A fist caught his shoulder, spinning him. Beside him, one of the older boys screamed, a wet, terrified sound that ended with a thud against the deck. Jacob dropped to his knees and crawled. His palms slid across wet planks. The roar of the crowd washed over him, but he focused on sounds closer, breathing, footsteps, the scrape of boots. A rush of air brushed his cheek. He ducked instinctively. A fist whistled overhead. Something bumped against his face. A leg. Without thinking, Jacob sank his teeth into the calf before him. The crowd exploded with laughter. "The rat's biting! Give him a tail to chew on!" Warm blood flooded Jacob's mouth. He gagged, but clenched harder, refusing to let go even as the leg thrashed and a fist pounded his back. A sickening crack silenced the laughter. Something heavy fell beside Jacob, a body hitting the deck, then lying still. The drumming started again, faster now. Jacob released the bleeding leg and lunged blindly toward the sound of labored breathing. His shoulder connected with knees. Both boys crashed down, but Jacob landed on top, driving the air from the other boy's lungs. The body beneath him went limp. Jacob tore off his blindfold, panting. Blood smeared his chin. The other two boys lay sprawled and motionless on the deck. From the quarterdeck steps, Captain Cormac watched, arms crossed over his chest. His eyes gleamed with something like approval. "He's got rat eyes. Told you." Cormac's voice carried across the suddenly quiet deck. "Rats don't win by strength. They win by surviving." The captain turned away, disappearing below deck. The crew dispersed, muttering and laughing. No pats on the back, no congratulations. A chunk of salted meat landed at Jacob's feet. He grabbed it, shoving it into his mouth before anyone could change their mind. He ate where he sat, bruised and shaking, tasting blood and salt together. Tomorrow there would be new trials, but today he was still alive. Jacob woke with the taste of blood still thick in his mouth. His jaw ached, face swollen where knuckles had connected. He rolled over on his thin mat, every muscle screaming protest. The quartermaster's shadow fell across him. "Get up, rat!" He tossed a dented metal bucket that clanged against the deck. A rusty lantern followed. "Bilge needs bailing. Don't drop the light or we all go sky high." Jacob nodded, not trusting his split lip to form words. Questions got you beaten. Complaints got you worse. He followed narrow passages deeper into the ship's belly, down ladders slick with condensation. The Revenge groaned around him, timbers shifting with each wave. The air grew thick, hot, stale, each breath harder than the last. Sweat trickled down his spine as the darkness pressed in. His lantern cast wild shadows that danced like demons across warped planks. The lowest deck opened into a cramped chamber where black powder kegs were stacked wall to wall. Jacob's stomach tightened. One wrong move here meant death for everyone. Above the doorway, someone had carved crude letters into the beam. One spark. All ash. He lowered the lantern, and dozens of rats scattered across the damp floorboards. Their eyes reflected the light like tiny embers. Iron traps lined the walls, some sprung empty, others holding their grisly prizes. A rat with its back broken twitched in the nearest trap, still alive, its pink eyes bulging. Jacob kicked it away and fought down bile. The bilge water pooled black and foul in a shallow pit. He knelt and began scooping the slurry, seawater mixed with rot, oil, and human waste. Each bucketful weighed more than the last. His arms trembled. A low moan drifted from behind a stack of crates. Jacob froze, listening. It came again, human, not the ship's timbers. He inched forward, raising the lantern. Light fell across a gaunt figure chained to the hull, a man, shirtless, skin covered in weeping sores. His ribs stood out like beryl. Staves, mumbled French words spilled from cracked lips. When the light touched his face, his eyes rolled back, pupils vanishing. Jacob stepped closer. Water. Footsteps creaked overhead. Slow, deliberate. Someone was coming. Jacob backed away quickly. "I didn't see you," he whispered. He dragged a crate to block the man from immediate view, arranging it to look untouched. Questions got noticed. Getting noticed got killed. He'd learned that much. Jacob returned to his task, methodically bailing the filthy water, eyes fixed on the floor. A rat swam past his boot. He didn't flinch. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. When the bucket couldn't hold another drop, he climbed back up the ladder, arms shaking from exertion. The sun struck his face like a physical blow after the darkness below. His skin was pale, clothes drenched. No one asked what he'd seen. No one needed to. In the belly of the Revenge, the dead weren't buried. They were stored. The sun hung like a burning coin, motionless in a bleached sky. The Revenge drifted on a glassy sea, her sails limp as dead men's clothes. No breeze stirred the Caribbean waters. The ship sat becalmed, a floating prison. Jacob dragged himself across the main deck, sweat already soaking his threadbare shirt. Men sprawled in patches of shade, shirts discarded, skin glistening. Some whittled bone into dice. Others sharpened blades with slow, methodical strokes against wet stones. The only sounds, metal scraping stone, occasional curses, the creak of wood. "Boy," the quartermaster's voice cut through the heat. "Rear quarterdeck needs swabbing. Take a bucket." Jacob nodded, grabbing the worn mop and filling a bucket with seawater. The quarterdeck, captain's territory. Usually off-limits to the likes of him. He climbed the stern steps cautiously, expecting to be cuffed for trespassing. No one stopped him, no one cared. The officers had retreated to cooler spaces below, leaving only an indifferent helmsman who stared blankly at the useless wheel. Jacob dipped his mop and began scrubbing salt stains near the stern railing. The wood was hot enough to burn his knees when he knelt. A sound broke his rhythm, a wet, rattling cough unlike anything human. It came again, mechanical and labored, like a broken bellows. Jacob followed the noise, moving toward the stern rail. He peered over the edge and froze. An iron cage hung from a metal arm jutting off the ship's stern. Inside, a man, or what remained of one, lay curled like a dried shrimp. Skin blistered red, cracked to raw meat in places. One leg ended in a ragged stump below the knee. His lips had split open in a permanent grimace, exposing yellowed teeth. The man's head shifted slightly. His eyes, still alive, horribly aware, locked onto Jacob's. His mouth worked soundlessly, tongue swollen beyond use. A whisper of air escaped, not even words. Jacob stepped back, heart hammering. Beautiful day for dying, isn't it? Isabella appeared beside him, leaning casually against the railing. She studied the caged man with detached interest, as if examining an unusual fish. That was our surgeon. Had a gift for gossip. Told the wrong joke in the captain's hearing. Jacob swallowed. Why leave him like that? Because this ship doesn't run on mercy. It runs on memory. Isabella's eyes never left the cage. And a good warning never rots too quickly. A shadow fell across them. From the rigging above, a pirate with a patched eye tossed a picked clean rib bone at the cage. It struck the bars with a hollow clang. The man inside didn't flinch. The wind shifted. Jacob gagged as the stench hit him. Excrement, festering wounds, the sickly sweet odor of rot. Flies swarmed the cage in a black cloud. Salt crusted the man's wounds like frost on meat. Jacob backed away, gripped tight on his mop handle. Isabella remained, arms folded across her chest, watching the man's slow death with unreadable eyes. He walked away in silence, bucket swinging at his side. Each step took him further from the cage, but not from what he'd learned. The quick deaths, a knife at breakfast, a shot to the head, weren't what you feared on a pirate ship. It was the slow ones, the ones that gave you time to think about what you'd done. A boot dug into Jacob's ribs, jolting him from fitful sleep. He gasped, eyes flying open to darkness. Above him, a weathered sailor loomed, silhouette sharp against the dim lantern light. Up, rat! Time to earn your food! Jacob scrambled to his feet, blinking away sleep. His back ached from another night on coiled rope. Salt crusted his eyelids. The ship creaked around him, still hours before sunrise. Deck. Now. The sailor didn't wait for a response. Cold air bit Jacob's skin as he emerged topside. Stars still peppered the sky, the horizon just beginning to lighten. A grizzled boatswain with 3 missing fingers waited midship, coils of rope at his feet. Here. He thrust a length of hemp into Jacob's hands. Reef knot, bowline, clove hitch. You tangle one line, you hang with it. Jacob's fingers fumbled with the stiff rope. He'd watched others tie knots, but never tried himself. The rope twisted wrong, loops collapsing as he attempted a bowline. Christ's blood, boy. You're hopeless. The boatswain spat over the rail. Nearby, sailors chuckled, pausing their work to watch. Jacob's cheeks burned as he tried again, the knot resembling a mangled bird's nest. A scratching sound erupted from a nearby barrel. Jacob glanced up just as something gray shot across the deck. Before he could react, a rat scurried up his leg, across his chest, and onto his shoulder. Jacob yelped, flailing wildly. The rope flew from his hands. The rat leapt, disappearing into the shadows. Congratulations, called a one-eyed pirate, grinning through blackened teeth. You're promoted to rat handling. The boatswain grabbed Jacob's shoulder. Perfect job for you. Get below and chase them out. Someone thrust a broken broomstick and a sputtering lantern into his hands. Jacob stared at the dark hatch leading below. Don't come back until they vote you captain. The crew's laughter followed him down. The hold swallowed him in darkness. His lantern cast dancing shadows across damp beams and stacked cargo. Rats scattered at his approach, red eyes glinting. Jacob swung the broomstick, missing every time. Sweat poured down his back despite the morning chill. The air hung thick with mold and rot. His lungs burned with each breath. Behind a sack of grain, something caught his eye. A boot, with a foot still inside, gnawed to bone. Jacob froze, bile rising in his throat. The lantern slipped from his grasp. He dove forward, catching it inches before it struck the deck. One spark near the powder barrels would end them all. The stench hit him then, rotting flesh, the sickly sweet odor of death. Jacob doubled over, retching violently. His empty stomach produced only burning bile that splattered the straw. Shaking, he climbed back toward the hatch, toward air and light. He emerged, squinting, face ghost white, legs trembling beneath him. The crew howled at his expression. The boatswain walked past, pausing to study Jacob's face. He nodded once, grudgingly. Didn't drop the lantern. Could have died. Might make a sailor yet. He tossed Jacob a scrap of dried fish before moving on. Jacob retreated to a quiet corner, chewing the tough meat slowly. His hands were stained with filth. His eyes felt hollow in his skull. He was surviving, not cleanly, not proudly, but surviving, and that's all the revenge demanded. Moonlight cut across the deck in silver ribbons. Jacob sat with his back against a stack of rope coils, fighting the weight of his eyelids. The night watch felt endless, broken only by the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull and the occasional creak of timber. The moon hung bloated above, casting its reflection across the water like spilled oil. He pinched his thigh to stay awake. Falling asleep on watch meant the lash, or worse. Voices drifted up from behind stacked crates near the quarterdeck. Low, urgent whispers that carried on the night air. Jacob straightened, straining to hear. 3 weeks at sea and nothing to show but empty bellies, a voice hissed. He's slipping. Cormac's madder by the day. If we wait too long, we drown with him. Jacob recognized the voice. Hodge, a scarred gunner with tobacco-stained teeth. Keep your voice down, came another whisper. You want to end up like the surgeon? All I'm saying is the men are restless. We need a plan. She's the only one who could pull it off. Got half the crew in her pocket already. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. There was only one woman aboard the Revenge. Isabella's waiting for the right moment, Hodge continued. She's smart, watching, counting. Jacob leaned forward, desperate to catch every word. His foot shifted, nudging an old tin bucket. It tipped, clattering down the wooden steps with a series of hollow bangs. The whispers died instantly. Someone's listening. The words sliced through the silence. Jacob's heart hammered. He threw himself onto the rope coils, curling into a ball, eyes squeezed shut. Footsteps approached, boots scraping across the deck. A shadow fell across his face. Someone nudged him with a boot. Just the rat boy, Hodge muttered. Dead asleep. Jacob forced his breathing to remain steady, fighting the urge to open his eyes. After a moment, the footsteps retreated. He counted to 50 before daring to move. Eavesdropping is dangerous. The voice came from above. Jacob bolted upright, heart in his throat. Isabella stood at the top of the stairs, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight. She descended with fluid grace, each step silent as a cat's. I didn't mean to, Jacob stammered. She crouched beside him, close enough that he could smell the clove oil in her hair. If I were planning something, I wouldn't tell anyone. I'd wait for them to tell me. Her eyes glittered in the darkness, unreadable as the sea itself. She patted his shoulder once, her touch surprisingly gentle. Remember that, little rat. She vanished back into the shadows as quickly as she'd appeared. Clouds began drifting across the moon, dimming the silver light. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Jacob hugged his knees to his chest, listening to the creak of the sails and the distant slosh of waves. Something had changed tonight. He felt it in his bones. When his watch ended, Jacob made his way below deck. He climbed into his hammock, but sleep wouldn't come. Around him, the crew snored and mumbled in their dreams. One man whimpered like a child. Another cursed in his sleep. Jacob stared at the swaying beams above, thinking of whispered plots and knives hidden beneath pillows. For the first time, he realized the danger wasn't just in storms or enemy ships or the countless ways the sea could kill a man. It was here, festering between crewmates like gangrene. The Revenge was full of men with grudges, and it might tear itself apart before they ever saw land again. The Revenge rocked gently in Port Royal Harbor, a predator waiting to pounce. Sunlight glinted off the water's surface, deceptively serene beneath a sky the color of bruised fruit. Sailors swarmed the deck like ants, hauling the last of their provisions aboard before departure. Jacob strained against the weight of a massive barrel, his thin arms trembling with effort. The wooden planks beneath his feet were slick with sea spray, making each step treacherous. The barrel wobbled, nearly slipping from his grasp. Move your arse, rat! A sailor with a face like cracked leather spat tobacco juice that barely missed Jacob's foot. Last load, we sail by dusk. Sweat trickled into Jacob's eyes, stinging like salt in a fresh wound. He blinked rapidly and glanced toward shore. Port Royal bustled with its usual chaotic energy. Merchants hawking wares, sailors staggering between taverns, women calling from balconies. None seemed to notice the gathering darkness in the sky. At the bow, Captain Cormac stood motionless, a statue carved from violence. His eyes never left the shoreline, narrowed to slits beneath his heavy brows. His lips moved in silent. Conversation with ghosts only he could see. "That place was never meant to last," he muttered, fingers drumming against his sword hilt. Isabella materialized beside him, her approach soundless as shadow. She said nothing, merely followed his gaze toward the city. Something passed between them, an unspoken knowledge, before she melted away again into the bustle of the ship. Without warning, the Revenge lurched violently. Jacob crashed to the deck, the barrel rolling away and splintering against the gunwale. Men stumbled, clutching at rigging and rails. A deep, primal groan rose from beneath the waves, as if some ancient beast had awakened from the depths. "What in God's name?" A bearded sailor crossed himself, eyes wide with terror. On shore, chaos erupted. The tall stone church tower at the harbor's edge crumbled like a child's sand castle. Buildings folded inward, their frames collapsing in plumes of dust. Screams carried across the water as people fled in all directions, trampling those who fell. A massive crack split the quay, swallowing wagons and men alike. Ships moored at the docks tore free as the water suddenly, impossibly, retreated from the shore, dragging everything in its path. "The sea's leaving," a crewman whispered, clutching a charm around his neck. "That's not good." The harbor lay exposed, muddy bottom revealed like an open wound. Fish flopped in confusion on the sudden shore. Then, with terrifying speed, the water returned, not as gentle waves, but as a towering wall of destruction. It crashed over Port Royal with the force of divine judgment, swallowing the city whole. Bodies and debris churned in the foaming maelstrom. The crew of the Revenge watched in stunned silence as the richest port in the Caribbean vanished before their eyes. "Cut anchor," Cormac growled, never turning from the spectacle. "We leave now. This place is cursed, and I won't share its grave." A heavy silence blanketed the Revenge as she drifted through the smoky fog just offshore from what remained of Port Royal. Men stood scattered across the deck, mouths shut tight, eyes fixed on the water. No shouts rang out, no sea shanties rose above the creak of timber. Even the waves seemed to lap against the hull with hesitation, as if afraid to disturb the dead. Jacob gripped the railing until splinters dug into his palms. Through the swirling mist, he watched the very tip of the church steeple, where he'd once seen a golden cross catch the sunlight, slip beneath the churning sea. Broken carts, bloated corpses, and merchant crates drifted past the ship like wayward ghosts. A child's wooden toy horse bobbed in the current. Jacob swallowed hard, his throat dry as sand. "It's the devil's punishment," whispered a sailor with a scarred face. "We took too much, and now he's collected." "The sea took what belonged to it," another murmured, crossing himself. "Always does." A weathered man with tattoos covering his neck clutched a charm carved from yellowed bone. Beside him, another began reciting a half-remembered prayer in broken Latin, the words stumbling from his lips like frightened children. Captain Cormac stood at the wheel, unmoved by the spectacle. His coat hung heavy with seawater, his hat lost to the waves. His face might have been carved from the same wood as the ship's figurehead. "Northwest, full sail." "No more delays." His voice cut through the fog like a knife. "Anyone mentions ghosts again, they'll join 'em." His words carried the finality of an executioner's axe, but Jacob noticed how his knuckles whitened around the helm. "Rat!" The quartermaster's voice cracked like a whip. "Up you go, eyes on the horizon." Jacob stared up at the towering mainmast. He'd never climbed it before. His hands found the wet ropes, slipping once before he secured his grip. Each pull upward sent tremors through his legs. Below, the crew shrank, tiny figures on a coffin lid. At the crow's nest, Jacob clung to the rough wood and scanned the horizon. The fog thinned at the edges of his vision. The sea stretched forever in all directions. No land, no sails, just endless sky, water, and the wreckage trailing in their wake. A movement on the rigging caught his eye. Isabella climbed with the ease of a spider, stopping halfway up. She rested against the ropes as if lounging in a tavern chair. "You see anything out there?" she called up, her voice carrying on the wind. "Only what we left behind." She nodded once, dark eyes reflecting nothing. "Good. Don't look too long. That's how you drown standing up." A sudden cry erupted from midship. A sailor hauled something from a fishing net that had caught on the hull. A bloated corpse in familiar clothing. One of their own, lost in the earthquake. The crew recoiled as if from a serpent. No one moved to touch it. Without ceremony, they wrapped the body in ragged canvas. The crew looked to Cormac for words, for ritual. He gave none. The shrouded form slid off the deck with a dull splash. No one watched it sink. As the wind finally filled the sails and the Revenge glided westward, Jacob watched the drowned city vanish behind them. The city was gone, but it didn't drown alone. Something in us went with it. The real voyage had begun. By midday, the sun vanished behind thick, bruised clouds that rolled across the sky like cannon smoke. The wind picked up fast, transforming from a steady breeze to hungry gusts that snapped the sails with crack-whip sounds. Men scrambled up the rigging, their bodies small dark shapes against the darkening sky as they fought to reef the topsails. Jacob watched the horizon nervously. The sea had changed color, from blue to slate to angry iron. White caps formed where there had been none minutes before. "Boy," the boatswain's voice cut through the rising wind. "Get that rope coiled and the deck cleared. Storm's coming fast. If anything's loose, it'll kill someone." Jacob sprinted between barrels and crates, fingers working desperately at knots. The ship lurched beneath him, sending him sprawling. He caught himself on a barrel, skin tearing against rough wood. No time to check the wound. He moved faster, securing everything that could become a weapon in the storm's hands. Within minutes, the skies opened. Rain hammered the deck like thrown stones, each drop stinging exposed skin. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The sea grew teeth, waves slammed the hull, sending water cascading over the sides. Jacob's clothes plastered to his skin, cold as death. Lightning split the sky, striking the water just yards from the ship. The blinding white flash illuminated frozen faces, men caught in postures of fear. A crewman panicked, slipping on the slick deck. His arms wind-milled as he tumbled down the stairs, a scream cut off suddenly. He didn't get back up. Jacob lost his footing as the ship tilted hard to port. He grabbed at anything and caught the cold, limp wrist of the fallen sailor. The man's eyes were open, rain pooling in them like tiny oceans. Jacob recoiled, his stomach turning. No one moved to help. The man was left where he fell, neck bent at an impossible angle. A sailor yelled over the howling wind, "He's done!" "Rope's not!" The realization struck Jacob harder than the rain. On the Revenge, a man's body became part of the deck until it was in the way. Water flooded the middeck. Jacob pushed a mop through blood and rainwater, inches from the corpse. His hands blistered. He didn't stop. One eye on the waves, one eye on the next task. A barrel broke free from a half-tied line and crashed into the mast. It splintered and rum flooded the deck, mixing with the rain and blood. A sailor slipped in the mixture and was knocked unconscious against the gunwale. No one checked if he was breathing. Captain Cormac walked calmly through the downpour, soaked to the bone. His coat clung to his frame like a second skin. He looked down at the dead man, then at Jacob. He swabbed slow. "You swab faster." As the storm began to pass, Jacob wrung out his shirt and watched two men dump the corpse overboard with no words, no ceremony. Just a splash, quickly swallowed by the waves. The lesson was clear. Storms were loud. Death was quieter, and no one mourned the quiet aboard the Revenge. The storm's aftermath left the sea glass smooth, deceptively calm. Morning sunlight pierced the lingering clouds when a shout echoed from above. "Sail, 2 points off the starboard bow." The lookout's voice cut through the exhausted quiet. Men stirred from their fatigue, heads turning eastward. Captain Cormac emerged from his cabin, spyglass already extended. He squinted through the brass tube, his face hardening into a predator's focus. "Fat sails, fat hold," he muttered, snapping the glass shut with a decisive click. Word rippled through the crew. Whispers grew to murmurs, then excited chatter. Jacob caught fragments. English sloop and merchant flags and easy pickings. The energy aboard the Revenge transformed, exhaustion forgotten. Men who'd been half dead from battling the storm now moved with hungry purpose. The ship's bell rang 3 sharp times. Drum beats pounded from below deck. Pirates scrambled to positions with practiced speed, some barefoot, others still wringing seawater from their clothes. "Gun ports open. Ready the cannons." The quartermaster's voice boomed across the deck. Below, the gun deck erupted into controlled chaos. Cannon ports creaked open, letting in slashes of morning light. Crews checked flints, measured powder, and greased muzzles. The gunner, a man with a face pitted like the moon's surface, thrust a leather satchel into Jacob's hands. He followed it with a rough hemp sling. "You're running powder now, rat," he growled. "You drop it, we all die." Jacob's hands trembled as he secured the sling across his chest. The leather satchel felt impossibly heavy. In the dim, swaying gun deck, he crouched beside stacks of powder kegs, watching wide-eyed as crews stuffed iron balls into greased cannon muzzles. The walls seemed to sweat from heat and tension. A distant boom shattered the air. Seconds later, water exploded skyward yards from the Revenge's bow. The English sloop had fired first, and missed. Their second shot didn't. The ball punched through the hull with a sickening crack. The ship lurched. Wood splinters rained down like deadly hail. A man screamed as a splinter the size of a dagger impaled his shoulder. "Fire as you bear!" Cormac's roar cut through the chaos. The first Revenge cannons erupted with earth-shaking force. Jacob was instantly in motion, sprinting with bags of powder. Smoke choked the gun deck. Fire flashed. Men shouted positions and orders. Each cannon blast knocked the air from his lungs. The ship pitched suddenly. Jacob lost his footing on a slick of spilled gun grease. He crashed to the deck, the powder bag tumbling from his grasp. A nearby match sputtered sparks. "Move!" a gunner screamed, lunging forward. The cannon blast faded to a distant echo, replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by groans and the creak of wounded timbers. Smoke hung like a funeral shroud in the gun deck, so thick Jacob could barely see 3 paces ahead. Men stumbled through the haze, disembodied shapes coughing and spitting. The stench of sulfur burned his nostrils. Jacob collapsed against a stack of cannonballs, his legs finally giving out. His chest heaved. Each breath scraped his raw throat. The muscles in his arms twitched uncontrollably from hauling powder sacks, and a high-pitched whine filled his ears, drowning out the sounds around him. The smell was worse than anything he'd known: burnt rope and wood, gunpowder, blood, and the unmistakable stench of men who'd pissed themselves in terror or death. It clung to his clothes, his skin, his hair. A scream cut through the fog, not the battle cries he'd heard before, but something primal, animal. On the far side of the deck, a young gunner thrashed on the planks, hands clawing at his face. Blood poured between his fingers, turning his features into a crimson mask. His screams became wet, choked sounds. Jacob's body moved before his mind could stop it. He crawled across the slick deck, dodging boots and fallen equipment. The other crewmen stood back, faces grim, in the smoky half-light. "Cannon kicked too fast. Wood gave out," a grizzled gunner muttered, not moving to help. When Jacob reached the boy, he froze. Where the gunner's right eye should have been gaped a ragged hole. A jagged splinter of wood from the gun carriage protruded from the socket, dark with blood. Men carried the wounded to the galley. The cook's table became an operating bench, its surface still crusted with last night's fish. Someone dragged over buckets of seawater. A rusted hook lay beside a bottle of rum. Isabella appeared like a ghost from the smoke. She rolled up her sleeves, her face a stone mask. "Hold him still," she commanded Jacob, selecting a small blade from her belt. Jacob pinned the boy's shoulders as others gripped his legs. Isabella heated the blade over a lantern flame, then approached. The boy bit down on a strip of leather, his remaining eye wild with terror. Jacob didn't look away. Not when the blade sliced into flesh, not when blood sprayed across his hands, not when the splinter came free with a sound like wet cloth tearing. His stomach knotted, but he kept his grip firm. The boy's back arched once more, then went slack. Isabella wrapped a cloth around his head with practiced movements. He'll live, but he'll wish he didn't. Across the deck, a man with a stomach wound received only a mouthful of rum before being laid in a hammock, left to die. Another begged for water, his pleas growing weaker by the minute. No one answered. Later, Jacob knelt alone on the deck, scrubbing at bloodstains by lantern light. The discarded splinter lay nearby, still wet with gore and tissue. He stared at it, this simple piece of wood that had destroyed a life in an instant. "That could have been me," he whispered to the empty deck. 2 nights later, the cook shoved a bottle of amber rum into Jacob's hands. "Captain wants this. Now." He pushed the boy toward the stern with a greasy palm. Jacob clutched the bottle, its glass slick against his sweaty fingers. The captain's quarters loomed at the end of the narrow passageway, a thin line of lantern light spilling from beneath the door. As he approached, voices leaked through the crack where the door stood slightly ajar. "I don't trust her. She's got half the crew eating out of her hand." Cormac's voice growled low, dangerous as a cornered beast. Jacob froze mid-step. The floorboard beneath him creaked. He held his breath. The quartermaster's raspy reply drifted through the gap. And the other half would follow her into hell if she promised gold at the end. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. They were talking about Isabella. He bent forward, straining to hear more. "She's playing a game," Cormac snarled, "collecting secrets like coins." "You want her gone?" Their pause. "Not yet. First I need to know who's loyal." Jacob backed away silently. He set the bottle down beside the door with barely a sound, then slipped away before either man could discover him. He found Isabella below deck, seated cross-legged beside a guttering lantern. Maps and charts spread around her like fallen leaves. Her fingers traced invisible lines across faded parchment. She didn't look up. "You were eavesdropping again, weren't you?" Jacob's mouth went dry. "How did... your feet? You walk differently when you're afraid." She motioned him closer, spreading out a nautical chart. "See this channel? It looks like open sea, but it's a trap. Sandbars beneath. Looks safe. Isn't." Her dark eyes lifted to his face. "People are the same." Jacob studied the map, its edges frayed and stained with salt water and God knew what else. "You want to live, Rat? Or do you want to matter?" Isabella asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. She smirked. "Good. If you answer too quickly, you're either lying or stupid." Her finger tapped the chart. "I have the ones who owe me, the ones who fear him more than they trust him." She nodded toward another section. "And the one with the burn scar who doesn't sleep well." Jacob realized with a chill that she'd mapped the crew like a battlefield. "Who sharpened his knife 3 times today?" she asked. "The boatswain with the missing teeth. Which gunner never looks the captain in the eye?" "The tall one." "No, the one with the beard split in 2. She nodded at each answer, even the wrong ones. Better than most. From beneath her sash, she produced a slender, curved blade, finer than anything else aboard. The metal caught the lantern light, dancing with amber fire. She held it out, letting Jacob examine it. You don't win fights with strength. You win them before the knife is seen. Jacob understood then. The maps, the questions, the way she watched every sailor like a hawk watching fish. She wasn't just surviving this voyage. She was using it. As he turned to leave, she added, "You're small. People overlook you. That makes you useful. But never forget, a shadow at the wrong time gets mistaken for a threat." The unspoken truth hung between them. On this ship, threats didn't last long. The next evening, the sky blushed crimson as sailors gathered on deck around an open barrel of rum. The sloop's plunder lay in neat piles, bolts of fine cloth, tobacco leaves bundled in twine, and glittering heaps of silver and gold coins. For once, laughter rippled across the Revenge, rough and genuine. Jacob lingered at the edge of the crowd, nursing a cup of watered-down rum. The quartermaster stood before the Bounty, his hook-nosed shadow stretching across the planks. "Share time, you dogs," he called, his burnt fingers dancing over the coins with surprising dexterity, according to the articles. One by one, men approached. Each received his portion, more for those who'd fought hardest, less for those who'd cowered. Jacob watched the ritual, mesmerized by the metallic clink of coin against coin. "Reeve," the quartermaster called. A wiry man with rope-scarred hands stepped forward, snatching his pouch with a grin. As he turned away, Brody, a sailor with an empty eye socket still pink from Isabella's surgery, squinted at him. "Hold there." Brody's voice cut through the revelry. "That's one too many, mate." The deck fell silent. Reeve stiffened, clutching his pouch tighter. "You calling me a thief?" His voice cracked upward, defensive and sharp. Men stepped back, forming a loose ring around the pair. Hands drifted to knife hilts. Captain Cormac pushed through the circle, chewing on a split piece of sugar cane. He spat a fibrous wad onto the deck. "This ship runs on math, not trust." He spoke softly, his eyes cold as northern waters. "If the count's off, someone's lying or stealing." Reeve's Adam's apple bobbed. He plucked a gold doubloon from his pouch, tossing it upward with forced nonchalance. "All this over a shiny turd? Keep it." He attempted a laugh that died in his throat. Cormac's hand shot out, snatching the coin mid-air. His expression remained unchanged. "Stealing from a shipmate's worse than mutiny, because mutiny's honest." Without warning, he seized Reeve's hand and slammed it palm down on a barrel. The captain's knife flashed in the dying light. One clean stroke, a severed pinky bounced across the deck. Reeve's scream pierced the evening air. Blood pulsed from the stump, spattering the weathered wood. The crew watched, stone-faced. Someone spat over the rail. "First one's a warning," Cormac muttered, wiping his blade on Reeve's shirt. "Next one's your tongue." He placed the gold coin between his molars and bit down hard. The metal cracked in two. He tossed the halves in opposite directions. "We don't worship gold," he said, meeting each man's gaze. "We worship survival." Later, as darkness settled over the ship, Jacob swabbed blood from the planks. He found the severed finger beneath a coil of rope, wrapped it in a scrap of cloth, and pitched it overboard. The tiny splash was swallowed by the vast ocean. "One coin, one finger, one ship full of knives," he whispered to the indifferent waves. The cannons had barely cooled when the boarding party returned. Ropes creaked as 3 men were hauled aboard like sacks of grain, bloodied, bound, and breathing hard. Their merchant vessel burned on the horizon, black smoke staining the perfect blue sky. Jacob's mop stilled against the deck, the blood from yesterday's finger incident now mixed with fresh splashes of crimson. The crew gathered, laughing and shoving each other. "Got some live ones?" Brody called, his empty eye socket crinkling as he grinned. The prisoners huddled together, a young sailor with a split lip who spat blood onto the deck, an older man with silver-streaked hair murmuring prayers through cracked lips, and a balding middle-aged man whose body trembled violently. Captain Cormac emerged from his cabin, squinting against the sun. He circled the prisoners, his boots heavy against the planks. The crew fell silent. "One goes to the sea," he said, pointing to the praying man. "One we question." His finger moved to the younger sailor. He stopped before the balding man, who flinched as if struck. "And one is yours, Rat." Jacob's head snapped up, confused. The captain was looking directly at him. "Me?" Rough hands shoved Jacob forward. The mop clattered to the deck. He stumbled, catching himself just before colliding with the prisoner. "He's unarmed," Jacob protested, his voice cracking. Cormac's eyes narrowed. "So are you." The crew formed a loose circle around them, blocking any escape. Some laughed, nudging each other. Others watched in silence, faces unreadable in the harsh sunlight. Isabella stood at the edge, arms crossed, her expression carved from stone. "Do it," someone whispered from behind. "Let's see if the rat's got teeth." Cormac pulled a small blade from his belt, bone handle, steel dulled from use, and tossed it at Jacob's feet. It landed with a soft thud between his worn boots. "Every man aboard spills blood," Cormac said, "or he spills his own." The balding man collapsed to his knees, hands bound before him in supplication. "Please." His accent was thick, possibly Dutch. "I have a son. I was just the cook." Jacob's hand trembled as he reached for the knife. His fingers closed around the handle, warm from Cormac's belt. His lungs felt crushed, each breath shallow and insufficient. He glanced at Isabella, silently pleading. She didn't move to help him. She simply nodded once. Firm. Cold. "Do it fast," she said softly. "Or it'll be worse." The cook crawled backward until he hit the ship's rail. Nowhere left to go. Jacob stepped forward, knife clutched white-knuckled in his hand. The blade went in with surprising ease between the ribs. The man gasped, a wet, startled sound. His eyes widened, more surprised than pained. Blood welled between Jacob's fingers, hot and slick. It took longer than he thought it would. The man clutched at Jacob's wrist, his grip weakening with each heartbeat until his hands fell away entirely. Silence descended on the deck. The only sound was the creaking of the ship and the distant cry of gulls. Then someone clapped, slowly. Another pirate whistled. The circle broke apart as men returned to their duties. The entertainment concluded. Cormac's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. "He's one of us now." Later, in the dim light of the lower deck, Jacob scrubbed the knife in a bucket of seawater. His hands still shook. The water turned pink, then red, then clear again as he scrubbed. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But something inside him was quieter now, not peace, but absence. A space where something had been before, now hollow and still. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the dew when old Thatch collapsed. One moment he was coiling rope with practiced hands. The next, he crumpled to the deck like a puppet with cut strings. His weathered face turned ashen, slick with sweat despite the cool morning air. "Thatch is down," someone called, more annoyed than concerned. The quartermaster glanced over, his scarred face showing nothing. "Boy, water now." Jacob dropped the sail he'd been mending and scrambled below deck. His bare feet slapped against worn planks as he filled a dented tin cup from the water barrel. By the time he returned, a small circle had formed around Thatch's prone form. The old sailor's chest heaved with each labored breath. Blood flecked his lips and beard. The same blood he'd been coughing into rags for days. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had ignored it. Jacob pushed through the men, cup extended. Thatch's eyes rolled back, only whites showing beneath half-closed lids. A fly landed on his lower lip, walking casually across cracked skin. Too late, Brody muttered, scratching his beard. He's nearly fish bait. Captain Cormac emerged from his cabin, drawn by the commotion. He didn't kneel or bend to examine Thatch. One cold glance was all he spared. If he can't pull a rope, he can feed a fin. The words fell like stones. No discussion followed. No argument rose. Two pirates grabbed Thatch by the arms and began dragging him toward the starboard rail. His boots scraped across the deck, leaving faint trails. A weak moan escaped his lips, still conscious enough to know what was happening. "He's still breathing," Jacob whispered, the water cup forgotten in his hand. No one acknowledged him. No one even looked his way. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath them, unnaturally still. Blue glass without a ripple. No wind filled their sails. No waves broke against the hull. Just stillness. "They always come when it's quiet," mumbled a one-eyed pirate, scanning the water. Within minutes, a gray triangle broke the surface off the port side. Then another. A third followed, circling lazily. The crew gathered at the rail, watching with casual interest, as if attending a mundane performance they'd seen countless times. "They smell it," someone chuckled. "Always do." The pirates didn't simply throw Thatch overboard. They lowered him gently on a length of rope like bait on a hook. His arms dangled limply toward the water. His eyes fluttered open, awareness returning in his final moments. No, wait." His words slurred together. Jacob turned away as the splash came. Soft, almost gentle. The silence after was worse. Then came the churning, the thrashing. Men cheered. Someone started taking bets on how many sharks would join the feast. When they hauled the rope back up, it held nothing but shreds of bloody cloth. No bone, no boot. Nothing remained of the man who'd sailed these waters for 30 years. The sailor wiped a splash of blood from his boot and shrugged. Cleaner than a burial. The ship creaked forward, catching a faint breeze. Jacob stood at the rail long after the others had returned to their duties, staring into the fading red wake. He was still breathing, he said aloud. A voice answered from behind. "That's why the sharks came." Jacob turned to find Isabella, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon. "On the Revenge," she continued. "You're not allowed to die slowly." The Revenge creaked beneath a blanket of stars, the night sky impossibly vast above the still waters. For once, no tempest threatened to tear the sails. No enemy ship loomed on the horizon. The vessel seemed to exhale, settling into the gentle rocking of a calm sea. On the main deck, 5 men hunched over dice carved from whalebone, their faces illuminated by a single lantern. Coins changed hands with soft clinks. The usual shouting and threats had mellowed to muttered curses and occasional barks of laughter. Jacob lay in his hammock below deck, swaying with the ship's gentle rhythm. His body ached from hauling rope all day, but he didn't surrender completely to sleep. No one did. Not on this ship. Even in slumber, his ears remained alert for the stomp of boots or the crack of a pistol, signals that meant run or die. His hand rested on the small knife tucked against his ribs, fingers loosely curled around the handle. A sound pierced his half-sleep, not the familiar bark of orders or clash of violence, but something raw, human, vulnerable. Jacob's eyes snapped open. The noise came again, a strangled cry from above near the quarterdeck. He recognized the voice instantly. Captain Cormac. Jacob slipped from his hammock, bare feet silent against the damp planks. The other sleeping men remained motionless lumps in their hammocks, either dead to the world or pretending not to hear. The ladder to the upper deck felt cold beneath his palms. The moon cast the ship in silver and shadow as Jacob emerged, ducking behind a barrel. No watch stood at the helm. The calm sea required no constant steering tonight. The quartermaster dozed against the rail, chin on chest. The sound came again, a moan that crawled up Jacob's spine. He crept toward the captain's cabin, staying low. The door stood slightly ajar, a thin slice of moonlight cutting through the gap. Inside, Cormac thrashed on his cot like a man possessed. His shirt clung to his torso, soaked with sweat. One hand clutched a pistol, finger dangerously close to the trigger. His face contorted with something Jacob had never seen there before. Fear. "Not again," Cormac mumbled, head tossing from side to side. "Don't leave me there." Jacob froze, barely breathing. The monster of the revenge looked broken, haunted. "Maeve," Cormac called, voice cracking. "Maeve, get off the docks." His back arched suddenly, voice rising to a desperate shout. "No, no, run!" His free hand clawed at his chest as if trying to tear something out from beneath his ribs. He remembers her only when the moon's full. Jacob nearly jumped out of his skin. Isabella stood beside him, barefoot and silent as a ghost, arms folded across her chest. "Port Royal took something from him," she whispered, "but something else before that." Before Jacob could respond, Cormac bolted upright with a gasp. The pistol came up in one fluid motion, aimed at shadows. Jacob ducked instinctively, pressing himself against the wall. Cormac's eyes darted around the empty cabin, chest heaving. His gaze seemed unfocused, lost in some other time. Finding no target, he lowered the gun and laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that held no humor. He reached for a bottle, poured rum into his mouth, then spat it onto the floor. "Dreams don't let you drown," he muttered to the empty room. "They make you breathe." Later, back in his hammock, Jacob stared into darkness. The revelation settled into his bones. Captain Cormac, the man who'd ordered men fed to sharks without blinking, who'd sliced throats for questioning orders, he wasn't fearless. He was terrified. Cormac didn't kill because he was stronger than fear. He killed because fear had broken him long ago. His worst enemy wasn't mutiny or the Royal Navy. It was memory. The quartermaster's boot caught Jacob square in the back, shoving him toward the growing pile of belongings, stripped from the dead. Sorted rat. Anything worth more than piss goes in that sack. He pointed to a canvas bag hanging from a hook. Anything else gets tossed. Jacob landed on his knees among the grim collection. Blood-stained coats, ripped shirts, broken belt buckles. The personal effects of men who'd been alive just days ago when their merchant schooner crossed paths with the Revenge. Now they fed fish, and their possessions fed pirates. He worked methodically, checking pockets and seams. Most yielded nothing. A broken comb, a damp scrap of paper with illegible writing, a child's wooden toy soldier. The crew had already taken anything obvious. Coins, rings, daggers. His fingers brushed across a tattered green coat with brass buttons. As he turned it over, something felt wrong. The lining had a thick seam that didn't match the rest of the tailoring. Jacob glanced around. The quartermaster had disappeared above deck, leaving him alone with the dead men's belongings. He slipped his knife from his belt and carefully sliced along the suspicious seam. His fingers found something stiff inside, a folded square of oilcloth. He extracted it and spread it open on his lap. The cloth revealed what looked like a crude coastal map. No compass rose marked the directions. No names identified the land masses. Just tide marks, small islets, and jagged coastlines. But one area stood out, a crescent-shaped bay marked with 3 red dots. Heavy footsteps thumped across the deck above. Jacob folded the map quickly and tucked it under his shirt against his skin. Something told him this wasn't meant for the quartermaster's sack. That night, Jacob found Isabella sitting alone near the stern, smoking a long, thin pipe. Stars reflected in her dark eyes as smoke curled around her face. No one approached her when she sat like this, a silent agreement among the crew. Jacob slid the map toward her without a word. Her eyes flicked down, then widened. She froze, pipe halfway to her lips. Her finger traced the red ink marks slowly, deliberately. This isn't just a bay, it's a dead harbor, buried during the old slave revolts. No one's mapped it in 50 years. She folded the map and slipped it inside her blouse without asking Jacob's permission. "Is it gold?" he whispered, leaning closer. Isabella gave him a sidelong look, smoke escaping her lips in a thin stream. Gold is loud. Maps like this are louder. From beneath her sash, she unsheathed the same curved knife she'd shown him before. This time, she laid it across her lap where the map had been. "This is how you hold power," she said. "Information and silence." Her hand found Jacob's shoulder, fingers digging slightly into his flesh. "No one else sees this. Not the captain, not the quartermaster, not the men you think are too drunk to care." Her grip tightened. "Because if they do, you die before I do." Later, swaying in his hammock, Jacob stared into darkness. He kept seeing the look in her eyes when she'd recognized the map. Not greed, but calculation. Cold, precise calculation. He'd thought surviving meant keeping his head down, following orders. Now he realized the game Isabella played had stakes bigger than gold, and he'd just become a piece on her board. 5 days west of Hispaniola, the Revenge drifted in a listless sea. The sails hung slack, sweat dripped from every brow, and the horizon remained stubbornly empty of merchant vessels. The crew grew restless, then angry, then dangerous. Jacob hauled water to the main deck, listening to the mutters grow louder with each passing hour. "We're chasing ghosts instead of gold? Cormac's gone mad since Port Royal. He's steering us towards something personal, mark me." The quartermaster paced the deck, his hook nose twitching like a rat sensing danger. His eyes found Jacob's. "Boy, fetch more water, then stay below." But Jacob lingered at the hatch, watching as the quartermaster approached a knot of disgruntled sailors, nodded once, then strode to the center of the deck. He slammed the butt of his musket against the weathered planks 3 times, the sound cracking through the humid air. "All hands to the mast. The matter of direction is called." Men emerged from every corner of the ship. Jacob recognized the ritual from the articles, the rare, dangerous moment when a crew could challenge their captain's course. Cormac appeared from his cabin, stepping into the circle of sailors without a word. His eyes swept the deck, recording every face. He folded his arms and leaned against the mast, expression blank as a shark's. "Vote, then," he said, voice quiet. The quartermaster produced a wide-brimmed hat, placing it atop a barrel. From a leather pouch, he pulled handfuls of stones, black and white, and distributed them among the crew. Black for change, white for the captain's course. When Jacob's turn came, the quartermaster thrust 2 stones into his palm, one smooth and white, one rough and black. The weight of them surprised him. Jacob approached the hat slowly. Cormac watched him, eyes never blinking. The captain's hand rested on his pistol, casual yet deliberate. Jacob's palm sweated. He dropped the black stone into the hat, the soft thud sealing his choice. He didn't know why, maybe fear, maybe survival. As he stepped back, he caught Isabella's gaze. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes tracked every man's choice. "We don't need votes," a voice thundered. Garrett, a thick-necked pirate with rotting teeth, staggered forward. "We need blood." His boot connected with the barrel, sending it flying. The hat tumbled, stones scattering across the deck like dropped teeth. "Traitor's trick," Garrett shouted, drawing his cutlass. 2 men tackled him from behind. A knife flashed. Someone screamed. Blood spattered across the deck. Cormac didn't move until Garrett broke free and lunged toward him with wild eyes. Then, with casual precision, Cormac drew his pistol and fired directly into Garrett's open mouth. The shot echoed across the water. Garrett's body hit the deck with a wet thud, jaw shattered, tongue in bloody pieces. The fighting stopped instantly. "No need to count votes," Cormac said, voice cold as northern waters. "This is our course." He wiped his pistol on his coat and holstered it. "And that's your answer." Later that night, Jacob found a stray white stone by the railing. He rolled it between his fingers, feeling its smooth surface before dropping it into the Black Sea. "They say we vote," he thought. "But steel votes louder, and steel always wins." Dawn slipped over the Revenge like a thief, spreading thin fingers of grey light across the deck. Jacob shuffled toward the bow, coils of rope slung over his shoulder. He'd barely slept, the events of yesterday's vote still playing behind his eyelids whenever he closed them. As he passed the captain's cabin, something caught his eye. He stopped dead. A black circle of tar marred the wooden door. Crude, simple, unmistakable. The black spot. Jacob's throat went dry. He'd heard whispers of this mark, the pirate death sentence. A judgment passed by the crew themselves. Word spread without a single shout. Men moved past the cabin, eyes flicking to the door, then quickly away. No jokes, no curses. Even the loudest sailors fell silent. The Revenge, already crowded, suddenly felt claustrophobic. "What is it?" Jacob whispered to Maddox, an older deckhand with a scarred face. The man didn't look at him, just kept scrubbing the same patch of deck. "It means he's been judged. By us. And we're waiting to see if he flinches." Jacob stepped back, regretting the question instantly. Knowing things on this ship was dangerous. He hurried away, feeling eyes track his movements. An hour later, Cormac emerged from his cabin. He stopped at the threshold, staring at the black mark. His face betrayed nothing, not anger, not fear. He walked past it as if it were nothing more than a splash of seawater and strode directly to the helm. But the air around him had changed. It crackled with invisible tension. That afternoon, Cormac dragged a barrel to the center of the main deck. He removed his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and sat with his cutlass across his knees. Slowly, methodically, he drew a whetstone along the blade. The rasp of metal filled the silence, and his eyes never left the men moving around him. High in the rigging, Isabella perched like a bird of prey. Her legs swung carelessly as she leaned against a beam, watching the scene unfold below. A faint smile played across her lips. Not joy, but calculation. She didn't fear what was coming. She wanted to see how it played out. "Keep away from that rat," Jacob heard someone mutter as he passed. Men who had shared grog with him days before now avoided his gaze. If he saw who did it, he better not say, threatened a sailor with rotting teeth. Night fell. At dinner, a circle of empty space surrounded the captain. Conversation died whenever he looked up. The knives seemed to catch more light than usual, gleaming with unspoken promise. Everyone waited for someone to make the first move, or mistake. Later, Jacob passed the captain's cabin again. The black spot remained, but beneath it, Cormac had carved 3 words into the wood. "I see you." The tar was still wet. Back in his hammock, Jacob stared into darkness. They marked him. Now he's marking back. Everything had changed. There were no votes now, no rituals, only timing, steel, and silence. And someone, maybe everyone, was going to die. The sun hung directly overhead, beating down on the Revenge with merciless intensity. Sweat rolled down Jacob's back as he hauled water to the galley. The air felt thick enough to chew. "Sail! Starboard side!" The lookout's voice cracked through the humid stillness. Every head snapped toward the horizon. Jacob dropped his bucket, water splashing across the deck as men erupted into motion around him. A dark silhouette appeared against the blue expanse. Tall masts, sharp lines, pristine sails. "English naval brig," someone muttered. "Coming fast." The Revenge transformed. Men who, moments ago, lounged in torpid heat now scrambled with frantic purpose. Pistols appeared from hidden places. Knives were strapped to belts. The gunners rushed below, feet pounding on wooden stairs. Jacob stood frozen until a hand shoved him toward the powder magazine. "Move, rat!" Below deck, men stripped to the waist prepped cannons with mechanical efficiency. Their faces had changed, mouths drawn tight, eyes darting. One sailor clutched a yellowed tooth on a string around his neck. Another loaded his pistol, emptied it, then loaded it again. These weren't the same men who'd laughed while feeding a dying crewmate to sharks. These men were counting their breaths. On deck, Captain Cormac stood at the helm, a brass spyglass extended toward the approaching vessel. His face betrayed nothing as he studied the ship bearing down on them. Clean lines, fresh paint, and too fast to be passing through. He lowered the glass with deliberate slowness. "They've come for us." The words settled like stones in Jacob's stomach. This wasn't some merchant vessel to be plundered. This was the Royal Navy, organized, disciplined, and determined. In his peripheral vision, Jacob caught movement. Isabella slipped away from the gathering crowd, her steps purposeful. She disappeared below deck without a word. Jacob hesitated, then followed, keeping to the shadows. Cormac's voice boomed across the deck. "They think we're ghosts from a dying age. Let's show them how we haunt." The crew roared back, not with confidence but necessity. Fear needed somewhere to go. Below, Jacob pressed against a bulkhead as voices filtered through the gun deck. The quartermaster's rasp was unmistakable. "If we wait till after the broadside, we'll die in his madness. We do it before, we might live." Jacob's heart hammered. The black spot wasn't just a warning, it was a promise about to be kept. A hand closed around his arm, yanking him into the powder hold. Isabella's face appeared in the dim lantern light, her eyes hard as flint. "It's happening. Tonight. Stay out of the way and stay useful." She pressed something cold and metal into his palm. A key. Back on deck, the English brig had raised its colors. The crimson ensign. No quarter. Cormac stood at the bow, arms spread wide as the Revenge turned to face its hunter. The wind caught his coat, making him appear larger than life. "Let the dead remember us," he called. Jacob gripped the railing, the key cutting into his palm. This wasn't just a battle. It was a reckoning, and he stood trapped between two storms about to collide. The Revenge shuddered as the first cannon volley tore from her starboard side. Smoke billowed across the deck, thick and acrid. The roar swallowed all sound for 3 heartbeats before the English brig answered with devastating precision. Their shots struck true. Wood exploded into deadly splinters that sliced through air and flesh alike. Jacob dropped to his knees, hands clamped over his ears as the world became thunder and screams. A jagged splinter the length of his forearm embedded itself in the mainmast, inches from his face. "Powder! We need powder!" The master gunner's voice cut through the chaos. Jacob scrambled to his feet, grabbing his leather satchel. The familiar weight settled against his hip as he sprinted below deck, dodging men and debris. His path between powder kegs and cannon crews had become routine in past battles. But something felt wrong. The usual shouts and curses had thinned. Orders came scattered and disjointed. Some men worked frantically, ramming shot-down barrels. Others stood oddly still, hands on weapons, eyes fixed on shipmates rather than the enemy. Jacob slowed his pace, suddenly uncertain who to approach. A crack of light from above drew his attention to the main deck. Through the hatchway, he watched 2 men at the helm suddenly shove the steersman, a grizzled sailor loyal to Cormac since before Port Royal. The man tumbled over the railing, his scream cutting short as the waves swallowed him. Another helmsman reached for his knife only to join his comrade in the churning wake. "It's starting," Jacob whispered, the powder satchel suddenly heavy as lead. On the port side, a gun crew simply stopped working. Their cannons sat silent while others boomed around them. The gun captain turned, face contorted with rage. "Load, you dogs! Load, or—" The blade caught him beneath his ribs. sliding in with terrible efficiency. He folded without a sound, eyes wide with betrayal, as his own powder man withdrew the knife and wiped it clean on the dying man's shirt. Movement high above caught Jacob's eye. Isabella stood in the rigging, her dark hair whipping in the wind. She unfurled a black scarf, letting it snap like a banner. Across the deck, men nodded, hands moving to weapons. A burly deckhand kicked open a weapon's chest, distributing cutlasses with grim purpose. Jacob ducked behind a coil of rope, heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't random violence. This was orchestrated. Friends turned on friends with cold calculation. Blood splashed across the deck planks. Men who'd shared rum and stories yesterday now whispered final words before opening each other's throats. Through billowing smoke and chaos, Captain Cormac emerged from below, cutlass already dripping red. His face was a mask of fury and something else, a terrible joy. "Thought you'd wait until the fighting?" he roared, cutting down a mutineer with a single savage stroke. "You cowards should have brought chains, not knives." The quartermaster appeared at the top of the main deck stairs, leveling a musket at Cormac's chest, his burnt fingers wrapped around the trigger. "The crew votes you out, Bill. You've brought us to death's door." Cormac never broke stride, moving forward with terrible purpose. "Then open it." The musket clicked. Powder pan flashed but failed to ignite. The quartermaster fumbled for his dagger, but Cormac's blade moved with the speed of vengeance, driving upward through ribs and lung. Blood fountained across the mast, painting the wood crimson. From his hiding place, Jacob glanced toward the English brig. It had stopped firing, now drifting closer with sails trimmed. The Navy men lined the rails, watching the pirates destroy themselves. "They're waiting," he whispered, clutching Isabella's key tight enough to draw blood from his palm. "They don't have to sink us. We're already tearing ourselves apart." The deck erupted in screams and steel as Jacob made his choice. Jacob slipped away from the clash of steel and gunfire above, ducking into a shadowed stairwell that led to the belly of the ship. The screams faded behind him as he descended deeper, his feet finding each worn step with practiced precision. No one noticed his absence, all eyes locked on blood and betrayal, not on a soot-faced powder boy. The magazine hold greeted him with its familiar, suffocating stillness. Dozens of black powder kegs stood stacked like patient coffins, waiting for their moment. A single lantern swung gently with the ship's roll, casting dancing shadows across the iron-bound barrels. The air hung hot and dry, thick with the scent of saltpeter and sulfur. Jacob's hand slipped into his pocket, fingers closing around the small bundle Isabella had pressed into his palm 3 nights ago. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a fire-starting flint and a coiled length of slow-match fuse cord. His hands trembled as he held them up to the dim light. "Insurance," she had called it, for when choices disappear. He pried open one of the smaller kegs, careful not to create even the slightest spark. The black powder poured like fine sand as he began laying a thin, deliberate trail across the wooden planks. The line snaked. Between crates, under barrels, up along support beams. One mistake, one early spark, and he would vanish in fire, alone in the dark. As he worked, the surgeon's face floated before him, gaunt and sun-blistered in that iron cage, crows pecking at his living flesh. Jacob remembered the rats gnawing at his toes while he slept, the metallic taste when he'd slit that prisoner's throat, the way the man's eyes had locked with his, neither blinking until one couldn't anymore. "This ship's already dead," he muttered, scattering the last of his handful. "I'm just burying it." Heavy boots thudded on the deck above, growing closer. Voices shouted in rage and panic. Jacob froze, the powder trail nearly complete. He dropped flat behind a keg, pressing his face against the rough wood. The hatch above burst open. 2 men tumbled down the stairs, locked in a desperate struggle. One wore the quartermaster's mate's dirty red kerchief. The other, Jacob recognized as one of Isabella's silent allies. They crashed into a stack of empty barrels, knives flashing in the dim light. Neither noticed the boy hidden in shadow. The red kerchief managed to knock his opponent off balance, sending him sprawling into the hold. With a sickening crunch, he brought a wooden mallet down on the fallen man's skull. Blood sprayed across the floor, stopping just short of the powder trail. The victor spat, wiped his weapon on his breeches, and limped back up the stairs. Jacob emerged from hiding and quickly placed the fuse end into the powder trail. His fingers arranged the flint beside it, ready but unlit. From his shirt, he produced a small candle stub stolen from the galley. He positioned it carefully on a small ledge, angled behind a thin cloth screen. When it burned down enough, the cloth would catch, then fall into the powder. A delayed sentence. Jacob knelt beside his creation, whispering not to God, but to the endless blue that had claimed so many. "You take everything, now take this." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a prayer. It was acknowledgement of an ancient, inevitable truth. He slipped back up the stairs, silent as the ship's rats. Behind him, hidden in the creaking bones of the Revenge, the fuse waited patiently. It was no longer just a ship. It was a bomb with a name. Isabella clawed her way up the rigging, her movements fluid despite the chaos below. The ship pitched violently as another cannon blast struck the hull. Splinters flew, men screamed, blood painted the deck in slick crimson patterns. Her scarf whipped behind her like a banner as she climbed higher, away from the slaughter. The crow's nest offered no shelter, only height. She pulled herself inside the small wooden platform, her chest heaving from exertion. Below, the Revenge had become a hellscape of smoke and steel. Loyalists fought mutineers. No one knew who to trust. Men who'd shared rum yesterday cut each other's throats today. Isabella reached into her belt and pulled out a small metal tube wrapped in waxed cloth. She'd traded 3 silver rings for it in Port Royal before the earth had swallowed the city. Her fingers worked quickly, unwrapping the flare with practiced precision. The weight of it felt right in her palm, heavy with consequence. She struck flint against steel. Sparks caught the fuse. Her face remained calm as the small flame sputtered to life, reflecting in her dark eyes. No hesitation, no regret. The flare launched with a deafening crack, arcing high above the Revenge. A brilliant red trail cut through the grey sky, a wound in the heavens. The signal was unmistakable to any sailor. Surrender. The fighting below paused. Men froze mid-swing, heads tilting upward to the crimson light. Confusion rippled across the deck. She's surrendering. To the British? She's mad. They'll hang us all. The violence stuttered, but didn't stop, like a machine grinding on broken gears. Captain Cormac stood at the quarterdeck, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. His eyes tracked the red flare, then dropped to the mast. Something primal shifted in his face. Rage. Overriding reason. "She's giving us to the gallows," he roared, hurling his spent pistol at a nearby sailor. The man dropped with a crushed skull. Cormac drew both cutlasses, their blades already dark with blood, and charged toward the mainmast like a demon escaping hell. Jacob emerged from below, his face blackened with powder residue. He blinked in the sudden brightness, disoriented by the noise and movement after the tomb-like quiet of the magazine. The flare caught his eye, a falling star in daylight. Then he saw Cormac, storming toward the rigging, blades flashing. Through the smoke, Jacob spotted the English brig. Its sails shifted, its course adjusting. They'd seen the flare. They were coming to claim whatever remained. "Take the wheel! Drop the flag!" a voice shouted from the quarterdeck. The mutineers surged forward in a final desperate push. Muskets fired at point-blank range. Men fell. Others climbed over bodies to reach the helm. The quarterdeck became a fortress under siege. Cormac reached the base of the mainmast, breathing hard, his shirt soaked with blood. Some his, most not. He looked up at Isabella, perched high above, her silhouette ringed by dying flare light. "You think they'll spare you?" he growled, spittle flying from his lips. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jacob crouched near the hatch, watching. Then he felt it, a subtle change in the air beneath him, a whisper of heat, a thread of smoke curling up from below. The spark had found the powder. It's too late now, he thought, backing away from the hatch. The flare hadn't ended the fight. It had only lit the stage for what came next. The cannons of the Revenge roared one final time, their defiance echoing across the waves. Loyalists rammed powder and shot down barrels with desperate speed. Smoke belched from the gun ports as iron death streaked across the narrowing gap between ships. "Fire! Fire till we sink!" A gunner screamed, blood streaming from his ears. One ball struck true, splintering the English brig's foremast. Wood exploded outward. Sailors scattered. For a heartbeat, victory seemed possible. Then the English guns answered. Their broadside came not as chaos, but as clockwork, a mechanical sequence of thunder. Each shot found purpose. The hull of the Revenge buckled inward as cannonballs punched through seasoned oak like paper. Men became mist. Planks became splinters. One iron sphere punched clean through the lower deck and into a powder keg. It didn't explode, not yet, but sat smoking, waiting. Below, in the shadows of the hold, a different death crept forward. The fuse Jacob had laid smoldered silently between barrels, a hungry serpent seeking prey. The powder trail caught, hissing as it crawled across wooden planks. Jacob stood on the main deck, watching smoke curl up through the boards beneath his feet. "She's breathing fire," he muttered, backing away from a widening crack. Cormac emerged from the smoke like a demon, cutlasses dripping crimson. His shirt hung in tatters, revealing a chest crisscrossed with fresh wounds. His eyes held nothing human now. "You die with me!" he roared, charging across the listing deck. His blades cut down a fleeing mutineer, nearly severing the man's head. Another fell, gutted. Cormac kicked the dying man aside without breaking stride. On the quarterdeck, the quartermaster raised his pistol toward Cormac. The shot never came. A stray musket ball punched through his chest from behind. He toppled forward, dead before he struck the boards. Isabella was there one moment, then gone the next, a ghost dissolving into thickening smoke. A muffled boom shook the ship. The rear hold erupted in flames. The shock wave knocked Jacob off his feet, hurling him across the deck. His head struck wood. The world spun, his ears filled with a high, piercing whine that drowned all other sound. Men leapt from the rails now, abandoning ship. Some clutched small bags of coin or jewelry. Others jumped with nothing but the clothes on their backs. A few swam toward the English brig, waving scraps of cloth in. Surrender. The Royal Navy vessel held position, watching the Revenge die. Cormac staggered to a hatch, yanking it open. Flames licked upward, illuminating his blood-streaked face. Below, the powder trail raced toward the main magazine. He stood frozen, cutlass drooping at his side. "You gave her to the sea," he whispered. The world turned white. The explosion tore through the Revenge like God's fist. The midsection of the ship vanished in a roaring fireball. Masts shattered. Bodies flew skyward alongside burning timber. The once proud vessel broke apart, its spine snapped by the force. Jacob felt himself airborne, weightless for an impossible moment. Then the sea rushed up to meet him, cold and merciless. He plunged beneath the surface, surrounded by bubbles and debris. His lungs burned, his limbs flailed. He broke the surface gasping, surrounded by floating wreckage and dying men. The Revenge burned above him, a funeral pyre sending black smoke to heaven. Around him, the sea claimed it all. Jacob clawed his way to the surface, seawater erupting from his lungs in violent spasms. His chest burned like he'd swallowed fire. He coughed until his ribs ached, spitting salt water that tasted of ash and blood. All around him, the wreckage of the Revenge crackled and hissed, a funeral pyre floating atop the midnight waters. Men screamed. Some floated face down, already still. Others thrashed wildly before vanishing beneath dark waves with barely a ripple. The English brig hung back, its lanterns cold yellow eyes watching the destruction. No longboats lowered, no ropes thrown. They simply observed the death they'd helped create. Jacob's fingers found purchase on a half-charred beam, splintered at one end and still warm to the touch. He pulled himself onto it, feeling the sting of seawater in a gash along his forearm. Blood trickled down his skin, mingling with the salt water. He floated there, transfixed by the flames consuming what remained of the ship, the only world he'd known since being sold like cattle in Port Royal. A wide-brimmed black hat drifted past, its edge singed, feather gone. Cormac's hat. Jacob watched it bob on the gentle swells, carrying the legacy of its owner into darkness. He made no move to grab it. "I'm not him," he whispered to the night. His hand moved to his chest, feeling the sodden weight pressed against his skin. The oilcloth bundle Isabella had thrust into his hands before the final explosion. The map. It was waterlogged but intact beneath his shirt. Bodies drifted nearby. The old sailor who'd taught him to tie knots with calloused hands. The cabin boy who'd wept during his first storm at sea. The quartermaster, his burnt fingers now still, eyes staring skyward at nothing. All quiet now, all equal in death. Jacob scanned the wreckage for any sign of Isabella, a flash of her scarf, the glint of her blade. Nothing. She'd either escaped or never meant to survive her own rebellion. A broken oar floated past. Jacob reached for it, pulling it closer. His fingers found something tied to its center. A small knife wrapped with twine. Isabella's blade, the one she'd used to steady his hand during his first kill. He stared at it, wondering if it was meant for him or simply driftwood now. The English brig loomed in the distance, waiting, expecting survivors to beg for rescue, for mercy. Jacob looked toward it, then deliberately turned away, using the oar to paddle in the opposite direction, toward open sea, toward uncertainty. As the fires faded behind him, Jacob drifted into darkness with the map, the knife, and no allegiance to anything but survival. I didn't die, he thought, but I didn't stay either. He wasn't a pirate anymore. He wasn't a powder monkey or a cabin boy. He was something else entirely. Something new. The black powder trail slithered like a serpent through the hold, sparks chasing its tail. Jacob had barely escaped topside when the flame found its destination deep in the belly of the Revenge. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Just silence, as if the world held its breath. Then the silence shattered. A blinding white light erupted from below, transforming the ship into a glowing lantern from within. The brilliance erased all color, all shape, all distinction between men and wood and metal. Jacob's shadow stretched before him, then vanished in the overwhelming brightness. The noise came next, not a crack but a violent tear in the fabric of reality itself. The first barrel detonated with a roar, igniting its neighbor, then another and another in a brutal chain reaction. Each explosion built upon the last, multiplying in fury. Stored cannonballs became deadly projectiles, launching through bulkheads and flesh alike. Above deck, the planking buckled upward as if some sea monster were punching through from below. Men screamed as they were catapulted skyward. Jacob glimpsed a sailor split cleanly in half by a flying timber, his top half still reaching forward while his legs collapsed separately. Another man's chest erupted as a splintered spar impaled him, pinning him to the quarterdeck rail like a grotesque flag. The main mast gave one deep, wooden groan, the death rattle of the ship itself, before snapping with a thunderous crack. It toppled sideways, taking the crow's nest and rigging with it in a tangle of ropes and canvas. Men clinging to the rat lines had no time to scream before being dragged into the churning sea. A roaring fireball tore through the midsection of the Revenge, flame erupting from every hatch and cannon port. The carved wooden figurehead, a woman with outstretched arms, blew clean off the prow, shattering into burning fragments that rained down upon the waves. Jacob felt the blast lift him, suspending him momentarily before the shock wave slammed into his chest. The world tumbled as he was thrown backward into the sea. Cold water closed over him, replacing fire with crushing pressure. His world contracted to bubbles, black water, and perfect silence. From a safe distance, the English brig halted its approach. Officers stood frozen on the bow, watching the pirate vessel tear itself apart. "Hold fire," one called, lowering his spyglass. "Let the sea finish it." Flaming debris rained down like hellish ash, hissing as it struck the water. The once feared Revenge began to sink, its midsection collapsing inward as the hungry sea rushed to claim it. The bow tilted skyward for one defiant moment, then slipped beneath the waves. Below the surface, the last keg of gunpowder detonated with a muffled crack, like the world itself exhaling its final breath. The smoke cleared enough for Jacob to see the world again. A bitter silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the soft hiss of dying fires on floating debris. The water around him was unnaturally warm, tinged pink with blood and cloudy with ash. Each breath tasted of burnt wood and salt. He struggled to keep his head above the gentle swells, his limbs heavy as anchors. A charred beam drifted past, and Jacob lunged for it with the last of his strength, his fingers, blistered and raw, wrapped around the blackened wood. Splinters dug into his palms, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. He draped his upper body over the timber, gasping. Every muscle in his body screamed. His lips were split and crusted with salt, yet somehow, impossibly, his heart still beat. Around him, the dead floated in eerie congregation. The quartermaster's bloated face stared skyward, unseeing. The cook bobbed nearby, his beard still smoking. Others Jacob had never learned the names of drifted in slow circles, their limbs moving with the current as if they might still be alive. The sea had not finished with them yet. Soon it would pull them down to join the Revenge. Jacob turned, scanning the horizon for the ship, but found only a smear of black smoke hanging over empty water. Not a mast remained standing, not a sail fluttered in the breeze, not even the carved name survived to mark its passing. "It was all real," he whispered, his voice strange in his own ears. "And now it's all gone." Through the haze, the English brig loomed like a spectre. It hadn't. Moved closer. Jacob could make out tiny figures on deck, officers with spyglasses trained on the wreckage. Watching. Waiting, judging who might be worth saving. A small barrel bobbed past, catching Jacob's attention. Through the salt blur of his vision, he made out a red five-pointed star stamped on its lid, the same marking from the map Isabella had recognized. This wasn't ordinary cargo, it was something worth killing for. Jacob grabbed the barrel and pulled it close. With trembling fingers, he reached inside his soaked shirt, feeling for the oilskin packet. The map was still there, pressed against his chest. No ship, no crew, no captain, just a direction and a mystery. Far across the debris field, something caught his eye. A rowboat drifting empty through the smoke, possibly launched during the chaos, abandoned in panic. Jacob began paddling toward it, one arm pulling the barrel, the other pushing through floating wreckage. Beneath him, something large shifted in the water. Not wood, not debris. Something alive. Something circling. Jacob froze as a shadow passed under his makeshift raft. The sea wasn't finished claiming its due. He moved faster, breath coming in panicked gasps. "Not like this," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Not now." With one final desperate lunge, Jacob grabbed the rowboat's gunwale and hauled himself over the side. He collapsed onto the wooden slats, soaked and shaking, staring up at the empty sky. "I didn't die," he thought. the realization washing over him like a wave. But who I was did. The twilight sky bruised purple against the horizon as Jacob lay sprawled in the rowboat's wooden belly. His cracked lips formed silent words to ghosts no longer there to hear them. The map, Isabella's map, remained clutched against his chest, a talisman against the emptiness surrounding him. Every breath hurt, every blink burned. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against wood and the soft creak of the boat's ribs as it rose and fell with each swell. No gulls called overhead, no wind whispered across the water. Just silence, the kind that follows death. Jacob pulled himself upright, wincing as sunburned skin stretched across his shoulders. His head spun from thirst, hunger, and exhaustion. That's when he noticed it, a small bundle tucked beneath the bench slat, secured with twine. The oilcloth wrapping gleamed dully in the fading light. He reached for it with trembling fingers, carefully untying the knots. Inside lay dried fruit, wizened but edible, a small flask of water, and a folded piece of parchment, its edges bleeding ink where seawater had touched it. The handwriting that covered it was slanted and elegant, though clearly written in haste. If you're reading this, it means you lived. And I didn't. Or maybe we both did, in different ways. What I gave you wasn't just a map. It's a key. Jacob's heart quickened. Isabella's words. Her voice seemed to float from the page, carried on the still air, the star on the barrel. It's not gold. It's knowledge. Hidden letters, lists of names, enough to sink navies, enough to buy them too. The brig was never chasing Cormac. They were chasing me. He glanced at the barrel he'd salvaged, the red star marking now clear in the dimming light. With the knife she'd pressed into his hands days earlier, Jacob pried open the sealed top. Inside, nestled in oiled canvas, were rolled scrolls sealed in wax, metal tubes etched with coded symbols, and a small silver locket. He opened it to find a miniature portrait, a child with Isabella's eyes staring back at him. She wasn't just a pirate, Jacob whispered, his voice strange after hours of silence. The realization bloomed like fire in his mind. A courier, a saboteur, perhaps even a revolutionary. The revenge had been her transport, not her cause. The mutiny wasn't about power, it was cover for her escape. She was never after gold, he said. She was after leverage. Examining the barrel more closely, Jacob discovered coordinates burned into the wooden lid, scorched there with heated metal. They pointed south, far, beyond Jamaica, to a place unmarked on any naval chart he'd ever seen. He read the last lines of her note again. If you make it to the island, bury what you must. Share what you can, and if they come for you, run faster than I did. It was signed not with a name but with a single symbol, a star inside a broken ring. With reverence, Jacob rewrapped the materials, resealed the barrel, and lashed it securely to the boat with scraps of rigging. What he carried could get him killed, or make him valuable enough to disappear forever. He took up the oars, cast one final glance toward where the Revenge had disappeared beneath the waves, and began to row toward the unknown. Not for gold, not for vengeance, but for the woman who had seen something in him, and the cause she never got to finish. Jacob rowed through the night, his shoulders burning, hands blistered raw against the oars. The stars guided him south, toward coordinates burned into the barrel lid. As dawn approached, a peculiar veil descended over the water, fog thick as wool, rising in curling tendrils that swallowed the horizon. He pushed forward into the grey wall, watching it part around the boat's bow only to close behind him like a living thing. Soon he was enveloped, adrift in a world reduced to arm's length. The slap of water against wood echoed strangely, as if the sound came from everywhere at once. Should be here, Jacob muttered, pulling the barrel closer. He traced the scorched numbers with his fingertip, comparing them to the rusted compass tied to the rowboat's thwart. The needle wavered, then steadied. According to Isabella's markings, He floated directly within the island's reach, yet nothing but mist surrounded him. Jacob dipped his hand into the water. It felt warmer than before. The fog shifted, not dispersing, but illuminating. A golden glow bloomed within the mist itself, transforming the air into something alive with light. The salt smell of the ocean faded, replaced by rich earth and flowering vines. A sweetness hung in the air, thick as honey. Jacob inhaled deeply, realizing how long he'd breathed nothing but sea and blood. Through the luminous haze, shapes emerged, not all at once, but in fragments. First, a jagged cliff face, black volcanic rock glistening with moisture. Then, twisted palms bending toward the water like sentinels. A jungle ridge materialized, dense with vegetation that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the waves. The island revealed itself piece by piece, like a half-forgotten dream taking form. The boat's hull scraped against something solid. Jacob leaned over, watching dark gray sand shift beneath the keel. He jumped out, bare feet sinking into ash-colored granules still warm from a heat deep below. He dragged the barrel onto shore, muscles trembling with exhaustion. The beach stretched empty in both directions, disappearing into mist. The tree line loomed 20 paces ahead. Too perfect, too orderly. No storm-bent trunks or fallen palms. The path cutting through the vegetation was straight as a knife wound. Jacob stepped into the jungle. The silence swallowed his footfalls completely. No birds called, no insects hummed. Yet life flourished everywhere. Flowers bigger than his head, vines thick as ship's rope, leaves that seemed to turn slightly as he passed. The trees grew in precise rows, their placement too regular for nature's hand. Deep within the island's heart, Jacob discovered the remnants of an encampment. Broken posts jutted from the earth. Canvas fragments hung from branches like shed skin. Rusted nails protruded from tree trunks that had grown around them. One tent remained standing, barely, its weathered fabric stretched over a frame of bent wood. Before it stood a plank staked into the ground, carved letters still visible despite years of rain. Deliver, then disappear. Below the phrase, the same symbol from Isabella's letter, a star inside a broken ring. Jacob dragged the barrel to an ancient banyan tree whose roots formed a natural hollow. He wrapped the precious cargo in oilcloth and buried it deep within. The living wood, covering all traces of disturbance. He marked nothing, committed the location to memory alone. When he returned to the beach, the rowboat was gone. The tide line showed no drag marks, no footprints save his own. The sea had reclaimed it, as if completing a transaction. Jacob stood barefoot on the shore, utterly alone. Good, he said. I wasn't rowing back anyway. Jacob gathered driftwood and splintered pieces of the rowboat's bench, stacking them into a neat pyramid on the sand. The salt-crusted wood crackled as flames caught, sending a thin column of smoke into the evening air. Not for warmth or signal, but for ending. From his pocket, he withdrew a torn sleeve from his shirt, its fabric still stained with gunpowder and blood that wasn't his. He watched it blacken and curl in the flames, memories of the revenge burning with it. Next came a fragment of Cormac's logbook, water-damaged, but still bearing the captain's sharp, angular script. The pages turned to ash, carrying away the records of men long dead. Jacob reached into his boot and pulled out a folded, damp piece of parchment. His press papers, the document that had sold him to the revenge. Someone else's hand had scratched his name there, claiming ownership of his life. He held it over the fire, watching the edges brown before dropping it into the heart of the flames. That boy drowned, he whispered as the paper blackened. This one walked out. The compass came next. He twisted it apart with practiced fingers, removing the trembling needle that had pointed him across the Caribbean. The brass casing he buried deep in the wet sand, patting it down until no trace remained. No more following orders. No more fixed points. From now on, he chose the horizon. Jacob unsheathed Isabella's blade, its edge still sharp despite the salt water. He pressed the tip against his left palm, drawing a 5-pointed star surrounded by a broken circle. Blood welled up around the shallow cuts, not deep enough to cripple, but deliberate enough to scar. A mark that would fade but never vanish completely. From the barrel's hidden compartment, he retrieved a child's silver locket. Inside, a map fragment smaller than his thumbnail. He carried it to a hollow in a nearby tree, sealed it with candle wax, and covered it with moss. Someone might come looking. Someone might need it. Along the shoreline, a body had washed up. Not from the Revenge, judging by the clothes. Jacob stripped the corpse of its salt-bleached shirt and trousers. He changed quickly, discarding his own tattered garments into the fire. He never looked at the dead man's face. As he walked inland, he dragged palm fronds behind him, erasing his footprints from the sand. No trail, no path. Only wind and leaves remained. Under moonlight, he spread Isabella's map across a flat stone. With a charred stick from the fire, he traced new routes through uncharted islands, hiding places, smuggling coves, secret harbors. Places where ghosts could disappear. Jonas Creed, he tried aloud, tasting the name. Tom of Black Coral. A pause. No one. He chuckled, selecting one and committing it to memory. The name itself didn't matter, only that it wasn't his. With the redrawn map, the dagger, and nothing else, Jacob vanished into the jungle's embrace. No flag, no crew, no past. The boy from the Revenge is dead, he thought as the trees closed around him. And no one's hunting a ghost. Jacob woke to bird song filtering through the jungle canopy. For the first time since the Revenge sank, no nightmares had haunted his sleep. No burning timbers, no screaming men, no Cormac's ghost reaching from the depths with blackened fingers. Then he heard it, beneath the gulls' cries. Something else. The unmistakable snap of canvas catching wind. His body moved before his mind fully registered the danger. Grabbing Isabella's blade, he scrambled through the underbrush, thorns tearing at his borrowed clothes. The island's interior gave way to a rocky ridge that jutted toward the sea. He'd found it yesterday, an old lookout point with vines growing over weathered posts where someone had once kept watch. Jacob crouched low, crawling the final stretch on his stomach. The morning mist hung over the water like a shroud, but through it he saw what shouldn't exist, a small sail, white and weathered, riding low in the water. No colors flew from its mast, no flag declared its allegiance. Just a single figure standing at the tiller, guiding the craft directly toward his sanctuary. His heart pounded against his ribs. No one should know about this island. It appeared on no charts. No survivor of the Revenge could have reported it, unless someone else had lived, or someone had been watching before the mutiny even began. Jacob slid backward through the brush and ran to the hollow tree where he'd hidden his treasures. The map fragment remained untouched in its waxed pocket. He retrieved the blade and tucked it into his belt, backing deeper into the trees. From the shadows of the tree line, he watched the sailboats approach. It moved with eerie patience, neither rushing nor hesitating. No cannon ports broke its hull, no crew scurried across its deck, just the lone figure, hunched and still. The figure stood as the boat drifted closer to shore. A red scarf wrapped around their head, exactly like Isabella's, but the silhouette was wrong. Too tall, too rigid in posture, not her graceful frame at all. The boat dropped anchor in the shallows with a soft splash. The figure made no move to disembark, simply sitting down on the bench and waiting, as if expecting Jacob to reveal himself, as if knowing he watched. Jacob retreated silently, moving inland. He bent branches at shoulder height, pressed deliberate footprints into soft soil, and carved Isabella's 5-pointed star into a tree trunk. A false trail. A test. Circling back along a hidden animal path, he positioned himself on the cliff directly above the beach. From this vantage, he could see the boat clearly. The figure remained motionless, head turned toward the jungle. Jacob steadied his breathing, fingers wrapped around the hilt of his blade. "Who are you?" he thought, eyes narrowing. "And who sent you here?" Jacob lay flat on his stomach atop the bluff, grass tickling his chin as he watched the boat below. The stranger hadn't moved in over an hour. The sail hung limp in the windless air, anchor set firm. Waves lapped gently against the hull, the only sound disturbing the unnatural quiet. His fingers tightened around Isabella's blade. The weight felt familiar now, like it belonged in his palm, but he remained still, patient. The revenge had taught him that rushing meant death. From his satchel, Jacob withdrew a brass spyglass, cloudy with salt and age, but still functional. Isabella had pressed it into his hands before the water took her. He extended it with practiced movements and raised it to his eye. The figure below hunched forward, face obscured by a broad-brimmed hat. Something about their stillness unsettled him, not the relaxed posture of someone waiting, but the rigid tension of a predator. Through the lens, he focused on the red scarf. His breath caught. Not Isabella's at all. This one was darker, stained with what could only be blood. It was tied too neatly, too deliberately around the neck, and there, a clean hole punched through one side, a bullet hole, a trophy, or a message. Without warning, the figure's head snapped upward. Jacob jerked back, heart hammering against his ribs. The spyglass clattered against stone. Even at this distance, he felt the weight of that gaze finding him, piercing through foliage and shadow. Impossible. The bluff was too high, his position too concealed. Jacob slid backward on his belly, then crouched low and began circling downward. He moved through the underbrush in a wide spiral, placing each foot with deliberate care. The lessons of the powder magazine, where one misstep meant death, guided his descent. He approached from the west, using seagrass and shipwreck debris as cover. The tide had brought in planks of wood, perhaps from the Revenge itself. Jacob ducked behind them, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the boat, empty. The small craft bobbed gently in the water. No figure, no movement, just a vacant bench where the stranger had sat moments before. Jacob scanned the beach. No footprints disturbed the sand. No ripples spread across the water's surface. The red-scarfed figure had simply vanished. Blade ready, he waded out and pulled himself aboard. Something lay on the bench, a tightly rolled scroll bound not with wax but twisted brass wire. No markings adorned its exterior. Jacob pocketed it quickly, uncertain if it was meant for him or someone else entirely. As he turned to leave, a whisper carried on the ocean breeze, clear as if spoken directly into his ear. "You've seen the map. Now what will you do with it?" Jacob spun, blade raised. Nothing. He searched the beach, the cliffs, the brush. Empty silence answered him. Not even disturbed birds or rustling leaves betrayed a presence. Behind him, the boat creaked on its anchor like laughter. With the scroll clutched tight in his fist, Jacob retreated inland. Every shadow between the trees seemed to watch him. Every bird call felt like a signal passed between unseen observers. Someone else is playing this game, he realized, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. And they know the rules better than I do. Jacob fled through the jungle, his heart hammering against his ribs. The ghostly encounter at the beach had shaken him to his core. He ran until his lungs burned, stopping only when the massive banyan tree came into view, its twisted roots forming a natural hollow where he'd hidden Isabella's barrel and map. He circled the area, scanning for footprints or disturbed earth. Nothing. The ground remained untouched, leaves and twigs exactly as he'd left them. He dropped to his knees, digging frantically until his fingers scraped the barrel's lid. Still here. he whispered, relief washing over him. Sitting with his back against the tree, Jacob pulled the mysterious scroll from his pocket. The brass wire binding glinted in the dappled sunlight. He took Isabella's blade, the one possession he'd managed to keep, and sliced through the wire. The heavy paper unfurled in his hands. Not a letter or note as he'd expected, but a detailed floor plan. A cutaway diagram of what appeared to be the island's inner ridgeline. At the center, a chamber labeled only with a single word: furnace. Jacob studied it, tracing the pathways with his finger. The diagram matched sections of Isabella's map, but revealed what lay beneath. He gathered his supplies and set off, following the ridge until it curved toward the island's western face. The hike took hours, the terrain growing steeper, wilder. Finally, he spotted it. A thin waterfall cascading over ferns that concealed something behind. Pushing through the curtain of water, Jacob found himself face to face with a round stone hatch set into the cliffside. Its rim was iron, rusted with age and moisture. Above it, faintly carved into the stone, a broken ring surrounding a star, the same symbol from Isabella's map. Jacob wedged Isabella's blade into the gap and pushed. Nothing. He tried again, throwing his weight against it. The hinges screamed like dying birds as the hatch grudgingly gave way. A hot gust of air burst out, not steam, but smoke. Something was burning inside. "This place isn't abandoned," he muttered, peering into the darkness. "It's waiting." He slipped inside, descending a stone ramp that spiraled downward. The air grew hotter with each step. Red light flickered ahead, casting long shadows. Along the walls stood alcoves packed with parchment scrolls, oil-dried ledgers, and sealed crates, all bearing royal crests defaced with knife marks. At the chamber's heart sat an iron forge, blackened, breathing, still faintly red-hot. Coals pulsed in the ash like a living thing. Above it hung a crucible, and beside it lay a mold in the shape of a royal insignia snapped cleanly in half. Jacob ran his fingers over coin dies, stamp plates, wax seal molds. Understanding dawned on him. This wasn't a treasure vault, it was a counterfeiting operation. The island wasn't a safe house, but a printer of power. Isabella hadn't been smuggling treasure, but moving tools that built and erased empires. On the far wall, dozens of names were carved into the stone. Some scratched out, others glowed faintly with charcoal rubbed into their grooves. Jacob traced them with his finger. These weren't pirates, he realized. They were ghosts with paper swords. On a pedestal in the center of the room sat a single book bound in shark skin, protected by a glass case. Jacob lifted the case and opened the book. Inside were names of officials, payment records, betrayals, naval placements, troop movements, all bought and paid for. A master key to the Caribbean's true power structure. Jacob wrapped the ledger in cloth and tucked it inside his shirt. Then he poured water over the forge until it hissed cold and dark. "Not a soul will believe what I have," he thought, climbing back toward daylight. And that's exactly why it matters. Port Royal awakened grudgingly to dawn, the sun spilling copper light across buildings still scarred from the earthquake. Fishermen dragged nets heavy with silver catch, while merchants arranged wares beneath salt-stained awnings. British Marines patrolled in precise formation, muskets gleaming. The taverns stood uncharacteristically silent, their usual drunken songs replaced by something far more dangerous. Whispers. A barefoot courier moved through the crowd, face half hidden beneath a worn hat. Scars crisscrossed his arms like pale rivers on a map. He slipped past the governor's guards with practiced ease, nodding to a servant who ushered him through a side entrance without question. The package changed hands, small, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with black wax bearing a 5-pointed star. No words exchanged. The courier vanished as if he'd never existed. Governor Beeston broke the seal in his private chamber, the wax crumbling beneath his manicured fingers. Inside, lay a sharkskin-bound ledger and a scrap of parchment bearing 10 simple words. One lie buys a crown. This book paid for 3. Below it, a broken ring symbol pressed into the paper. Beeston's hands trembled as he opened the ledger. For nearly an hour, he turned pages in silence, his face draining of color with each revelation. Names, dates, payments, all meticulously recorded. The web of corruption stretched from Port Royal to London itself, with his own signature appearing on 17 separate entries. "How did he get this?" he muttered, reaching for his rum but finding his hand too unsteady to pour. "How did he survive?" By midday, naval officers were summoned discreetly to the governor's mansion. By dusk, 3 prominent figures had vanished. Admiral Penrose, whose ship had mysteriously allowed a Spanish galleon passage. Father Wilcox, whose church stored more than communion wine in its cellar. James Harrington, the banker whose ledgers balanced perfectly despite impossible mathematics. In the taverns, strange stories circulated. A boy with a star-shaped scar bought drinks for sailors, asking questions about naval patrols. A ship carrying only paper and ink slipped into harbor before dawn, departing without raising sail. A man in a red scarf walked the docks, dropping coins bearing unfamiliar markings. Morning revealed a charcoal mural stretching across the harbor warehouse. A pirate ship split perfectly down the middle, flames consuming one half, water the other. Above it, Latin words that children were already copying in chalk throughout the city. Veritas merces est. Truth is the reward. Far away, on an unnamed island, jungle vines reclaimed the forged chamber. The hollow tree stood empty, moss covering the entrance to secrets no map would ever show again. A small sailboat cut through golden waters, heading west into open sea. Jacob stood at the helm, Isabella's knife tucked into his belt, the wind carrying him toward horizons unmarked by any flag. Behind him, an empire began to rot from within, undone not by cannons, but by ink. The end. Let us know in the comments below what era or theme you'd like to see us explore next.